Okay. We're not done yet. We're going to do one more.
This is a song that is very good for little kids.
Yeah. If there's any little kids around here, take a good look at what you are wearing. If there's any big kids or grown-ups, you might as well do the same thing. Okay. Are you ready?
Accessories count too.
What are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today? Today, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today? If you're wearing blue, please stand up. If you're wearing blue, please tie your shoe or pretend to tie your shoe. If you're wearing blue, dance all around. If you're wearing blue, please sit back down. Oh, 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 what are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today? Today, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today? If you're wearing red, please stand up. What's our rhyme? If you're wearing red, pat your head. If you're wearing red, dance all around. If you're wearing red, please sit back down. Oh, 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 what are you wearing? What are you wearing? Oh, what are you wearing today? Today, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? Oh, what are you wearing today? If you're wearing green, please stand up. If you're wearing green, pretend that you are a queen or a king. Give us the wave there. La, 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 la. If you're wearing green, dance up around. If you're wearing green, please sit back down. Oh, 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 what are you wearing? Oh, what are you wearing? Oh, what are you wearing today? Today, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? Oh, what are you wearing today? If you're wearing white, please stand up. If you're wearing white, give us a great big fright. If you're wearing white, jump up and down. If you're wearing white, please sit back down. Oh, 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 what are you wearing? What are you wearing? Oh, what are you wearing today? Today, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today? If you're wearing clothes, please stand up. If you're wearing clothes, tap yourself on the nose. If you're wearing clothes, dance all around. If you're wearing clothes, please sit back down. Oh, 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 what are you wearing? What are you wearing? Oh, what are you wearing today? Today, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? What are you wearing today? Thank you.
Goodness. So should we sing something together? All right, come on. In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed the seas. Oh, in the land of submarines. Everybody! We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. Oh, we all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. And our friends are all on board. Many more of them live next door. And the band begins to play. Everybody get out your instrument, whatever it is. Here we go. Come on, man. You guys are good. Here we go. Oh, 1, 2, everybody. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. As we live a life of ease. Life of Everyone has all we need.
That's all we need.
Sky of blue.
Sky of blue.
And sea of green.
And sea of green.
In our yellow.
In our yellow.
Submarine.
Yeah.
One more time. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. A yellow submarine. Can we try it in Spanish? Here we go. En la ciudad.
Donde yo nací.
Come on.
Vive el Señor.
Yeah.
A navegar al mar.
Check that out.
Y nos dio en la vida, en la tierra
Yeah.
del submarino.
En español.
Todos viven submarino amarillo, submarino amarillo, submarino amarillo. Todos viven submarino amarillo, submarino amarillo, submarino amarillo.
You better call for the counselor. You better call for the nurse. I bet you have seen bad things, but I have seen worse. I went into my cabin, and what did I see? A six-legged, two-winged up robot staring back at me. There's a bug in my bed. Lord have mercy, what am I gonna do? You better call for the exterminator so I can lose these bug in my bed blues. On his big hairy paws, he's got big hairy claws. This bug has a stinger 2 inches long. There's a bug in my bed. Lord have mercy, what am I gonna do? You better call for the exterminator so I can lose these bug in my bed blues. Oh, he's creepy.
Open the window now. Try that. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. You want to try that? Open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Well, George and I travel all over the place. Open the window, let the dove fly in. We love to see each and every smiling face. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Everywhere we go from California to France. Open the window, let the dove fly in. We love to play our music and make people dance. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Everybody, open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. We've been to the west, we've been to the east. Open the window, let the dove fly in. But where we are right now, that's where we love the best. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Tomorrow never comes and yesterday's gone. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Today's the only day for us to sing our song. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Everybody, open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Let it fly in, George. North in Alaska, south in old Peru. Open the window, let the dove fly in. We see lots of folks like me and you. Open the window, let the dove fly in. From Africa down to Tennessee. Open the window, let the dove fly in. All people want is to live and be free. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Everybody, open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Well, some people have money, some people have none. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Now what's the use of money if you're not having fun? Open the window, let the dove fly in. All we need to do is reach out our hand. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Peace and love will spread all over this land. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Everybody, open the window, children. Open the window now. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove. Let's do it one more time. Open the window, children. Let me hear you guys sing it. Open the window now. Good. Open the window, children. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in. Open the window, let the dove fly in.
This is a round that you will appreciate if you're not one who is fond of singing, because you can participate and never use your voice. The first thing that you do for this round is this. Can you do that? Like P-S-S-T with a little P. All right. The second word of this song is. So let's try that much together. Are you ready? And one more time. Yeah. Then you go like this. 2 kisses. Put that all together. You're going to say, ah, with a little, bring your arm down and do a little wiggle as you do. Yeah, on this hot day. Here we go. We'll try that much so all together. Are you ready? One more time. Yeah. And then you're going to do a little shoulder shake, and you go. Ready? Let's try the second half. If you've ever wondered where beatboxers come from, you're about to become one. So here we go. The whole thing all together then. Go. Wait a second, we forgot to divide the audience. Oh, yeah. You guys stay with Steve and Tara. Sorry. How about if you stay with Marin and myself?
The teenagers. I want the teenagers.
The teenagers are invited to be on Tara's side. Okay. We'll let you guys, let's do it one time all together. Then we'll have the teenagers team go first, and then we'll come in halfway. Here we go.
All right.
All right, you guys ready to shake with me? This is the Holy Guacamole Band. Give them a hand for the Holy Guacamole Band. Woo! Guys. So if you know this, sing along with us. When I say Holy Guacamole, you all say Holy Guacamole back, all right? Here we go. Come on, shake it up, everybody. Come on, put your hands together, everybody. Come on, we got to get it moving. No sitting still here. Come on, get it moving. Go ahead. It's at my refrigerator.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, wonder what to make for dinner later.
Uh-huh.
Oh, and the avocados I've been saving started giving me this craving. And so I called my friend Maria. I said, do you have that recipe? Yeah, sing it up, honey. Well, we made it on that rainy day and sent my spirit flying away for holy guacamole. Say, oh, it's so delicious. Said holy guacamole. Come on.
Very nutritious, I tell you.
A holy guacamole. Come on.
Tell you, it must be delicious.
Beautiful. A holy guacamole. Good job, guys.
Shake, shake, shake.
So if you're wondering about the recipe, you just got to listen to the song. That's what I do. Where you take 2 avocados, chop up your onions and tomatoes, a half a lemon and a pinch of salt, mince some garlic, and that's what we call holy guacamole. Say, a holy guacamole. Come on. Good job. Holy guacamole. Beautiful. Holy guacamole. People, shake it up. All right, keep it shaking. Keep it shaking. Keep the claps going, buddy. Guacamole is very delicious.
Thank goodness it's also nutritious.
To make it, you must be ambitious. It's supercalifragilistic. You can serve it on plates or in dishes. You can dip it with chips or knishes. You can share it with sharks or with fishes. And in this great mixed-up world of green and blue and me and you, it can make all your wishes come true. Shake it up, shake it up, do it up, do it up. Here we go, everybody. I'm gonna say, holy guacamole, say. Oh, holy guacamole. Good job, holy guacamole. So good, holy guacamole. Yeah, come on, guys. This has been fun. You know what? And now we're done. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you get a CD, right? When the show is over, can I get a CD? That's the best kind.
Well, I've got one more. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
You put ya.
You put your who?
You put your right hand in, you put your right hand out, you put your right hand in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about. You put your left hand
Hey,
in.
wait. Isn't this kind of a dancing song? What are you all sitting down for? Everybody up. Everybody up. Come on, you guys. We need a little help here. Nap time comes later. Right now, we need you all to get up and help us sing the
1, 2, 3. You put your right hand in, you put your left hand out,
you put your left hand in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about.
You put your right foot in, you put your right foot out, you put your right foot in, and you shake it all about.
You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about.
You put your left foot in, you put your left foot out, you put your left foot in, and you shake it all about.
You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. That's what
it's all about. You put your whole self in, you put your whole self out, you put your whole self in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around.
That's what it's
all about.
Everybody knows the pop part, right? monkey thought it was all in fun, but pop goes the weasel.
Penny for a spool of thread, penny for a needle.
Well, that's the way the money goes. Pop goes the weasel.
Penny for rice, penny for a treacle.
What? Half a pound of two-penny rice, half a pound of treacle. Mix it up and make it nice, and pop goes the weasel.
Up and down the London road, in and out of the Eagle.
That's the way the money goes, and pop goes the weasel. Simon Green and green pies, no kind of weasel. Just kiss me quick and I'll be gone, and pop goes the weasel. Round and round the cobbler's bench, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought it was all in fun, and pop goes the weasel.
All right. Hey.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Barry. Councilmember Clay.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Present.
Councilmember Sniffer.
Present.
Councilmember Wright.
Here. Are there any council comments? Councilmember Stevens.
My constituent, Pat Lovelace, the peace delegate, has sent his apologies that he couldn't be with us tonight. And he's went to a demonstration yesterday and is under the weather again tonight.
Councilmember Clay.
One comment, there's been a lot of traffic on the Long Branch listserv about the trash collectors, and there's pretty much a flurry of it over the weekend, and the issue is that several of the residents are witnessing the trash collectors pick up recycling and put it in with the regular trash, and are witnessing the trees going in with the regular trash instead of with composting. And I have to admit that I have seen them do this as well, and have just kind of been observing and listening. So, you know, I've reported this before, and, you know, the Long Branch community, there's some seriously vigilant people there watching out, and very environmentally conscious and really committed to our role as as leaders in the environment. And in the past, when we've talked about this, I know we've talked about, you know, the need to retrain people in those kinds of things, or that they're new people. But I think maybe we should come back around to it as a discussion item. I know we use contractors for this work, and I know that we can get different contractors on any, you know, we can get different staff members on any given day, and we try to get the same people from the contracting firm over and over again, but, you know, that doesn't always happen, and so this is going to be a structural problem, an ongoing structural problem, that we're going to have people who haven't been trained or are new, and so maybe, well, not maybe, I think we should look at a longer-term solution to resolve this issue. And that's the only comment that I have.
Yes. Councilmember Wright?
I had a couple comments. The first is regarding the coming stimulus package from the federal government. I would suggest to my council colleagues that we ask the staff to draft either a letter or a resolution which would be sent to our federal representatives, state representatives, and county representatives regarding the stimulus. In there we can, make sure they don't forget about Tacoma Park. And I was just rereading the governor's correspondence on this, and early on he says he's in the correspondence, he says he's in close contact with congressional delegation, county and municipal leadership. But at the end of the letter he says, while you may see the need to pursue funding for projects on behalf of your county, he excludes municipalities in that last sentence. So I just want to make sure he doesn't forget about municipalities. So I think we should draft something, make it clear what are important to us in the sort of immediate term shovel-ready type projects we have, as well as the longer-term projects. One thing I think we should highlight in there, and there's probably many, and we should all just submit our items to Barb, and then we can have it drafted together. One item at the Community Indicators Project on housing, at their presentation, there was a lot of talk about energy efficiency in housing, situations where tenants, the landlords aren't paying for the utilities, so they've separated out the individual apartments' utilities, and so the landlord has no incentive to increase the efficiency on the unit or the heating devices that are heating or cooling the unit. So people are paying, in some cases, $400 a month in utility bills. So that was just a good example where we thought there's the potential, and President-elect Obama has talked about really greening the country, and one of the ways doing that is making buildings, both government buildings, but as well as residents, more energy efficient. So I hope that can be one of the items we have in there. So that's the first item. The second has to do with streetlights. Again, my favorite topic. In this time, though, I think a number of the streetlights are actually city lights. So I've been notified that lights in front of 705 Carroll Avenue, in front of the SunTrust Bank, and the Laurel Avenue median close to the clock, the corner of Sycamore and Ethan Allen near the co-op, and on Carroll near the gazebo, near the bus stop signs seem to be out. So that's a number of city lights, and I know we've been trying really to get on Pepco about replacing their lights, so I hope that we can get those lights back on as quickly as possible. Incidentally, I think also the clock on one side of the clock on Carroll Avenue is stopped, so there's some issue with the electricity.
My recollection is that may be a long-term issue.
Well, as much as some of us may want to freeze time, I think we should figure out the long-term solution to that one. So that's streetlights. I don't know if, Barb, if you have any comments or thoughts related to those.
No, you had given me the heads up that you would be raising these issues, Councilmember Wright, so I do have some information to share. Of the 5 locations that you mentioned, 4 of those are the city's responsibility. Excuse me. The one at 7005 Carroll in front of the SunTrust Bank and at the corner of Sycamore and Ethan Allen, those 3 lights are situations where the conduit was either broken or cut due to various construction-related activities. Public Works Director indicated that she expects the contractor to begin repair in January. They had actually hoped to do this in December, but there was inclement weather, and that prevented them from taking care of those locations. The one in the Laurel Avenue median, we have made our contractor aware of it. We have a service contract where someone comes once a month, basically, to deal with lighting issues to any of the city-owned decorative lights. The fifth location, which was the one near the gazebo, this is actually owned by Park and Planning, and so the Public Works staff has forwarded that problem and concern to Park and Planning for follow-up.
Okay, great. Were any of the conduits that were severed a result of our wonderful WSSC project that's been going on along Carroll Avenue?
I asked.
I mean, I'd be shocked if they didn't take care to be aware of the.
Yeah, I asked that same question. You know, it's always, unless someone reports it, it's always hard to know who's responsible. We believe that there may have been an issue related to the city contractor working on the Carroll Avenue streetscape, and there may have been a separate issue that we suspect involves WSSC, but we probably won't ever be able to prove it.
Just take 50% from each.
Okay, the other items, the other thing was, I noticed that the guardrails on the southern side of Philadelphia near Piney Branch Road have now been marked with white paint. I'm pretty certain it's not graffiti. And I think that suggests that, because it's actually the length of guardrail that are very decayed and rusted, it suggests that perhaps WSHA or SHA is close to, has already marked those for repair, and that's a good sign. I don't know if you know anything.
I don't. Obviously, our staff had raised this issue with Senator Raskin's aide, and as you know, we had also given a list of SHA-related issues to the governor's staff. My suspicion is between those two channels that perhaps that prompted something, but I don't know that for sure.
Great. Do we know the other items, though, that some of the other pedestrian items that we gave were actually getting the new pedestrian walk signal lights that they put on at Piney Branch and Philadelphia and Ray activated? Do we have any news on that?
The Piney Branch in Philadelphia, you may recall, this was a situation where at least the stated reason we were given by SHA was that they needed a police presence while they were doing some things, and we had certainly offered our assistance. The information that we've received last week is that they have scheduled State Highway employees and Maryland State Police are supposed to be on site on January 29th. That's their target date. So we'll certainly follow up as that date approaches, but that's the latest information that we have on the signals at Piney Branch in Philadelphia.
Okay. And what about, we're also working on potentially getting something done on Carroll at Columbia and Park. That's the crosswalk near Savory. Kids use that. There's a bus stop near there, morning bus stop. There's a lot of children that use it. A number of my constituents have complained about almost being hit, similar to one of your constituents, where the drivers ignore the crosswalks. I understand the paddle thingamajobbies that they put in are no longer being installed by SHA, so I'm wondering if we have any progress on that.
No, I wasn't able to touch base with the staff about that location, but we'll try to have some information for you either later this week or at next week's council meeting.
Great. Two more items. Piney Branch Pool. I just wanted to check and see if we have any, a number of my constituents are anxiously awaiting the details of when the pool will be open, when they'll be able to swim, and I'm anxiously excited to get them that information, so I was wondering if we have any update on the Washington Adventist Services and their plans for when the pool might be open to the public and have the scheduled hours.
I have the Washington Adventist Services website up in front of me right now, and I can tell you that the pool will be open Sundays from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Monday through Friday from 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m., and Monday through Thursday, 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's a total of 46 hours per week.
Could you repeat the first? It was Sunday 8?
Sunday 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then the early morning swim would be Monday through Friday, 6:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m.
So and then Monday through Friday, and the 4 to 10 is also Monday through Friday?
That's Monday through Thursday would be the 4 to
Anything on Friday afternoon or Saturday?
Nothing on Friday afternoon or Saturday at this time.
I wonder if that has to do with the fact that it's a Seventh-day Adventist managed building.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it
That's
does. As far, they're targeting to be open by at least or no later than January 15th. However, the contract with the county does specify that Adventist Community Services cannot begin until the county, and I'm quoting this, until the county inspects and certifies the pool and issues a permit for its operation, and ACS receives a written notice to proceed from the county. So my understanding is that the pool renovations have been completed, and they're now waiting for the issuance of the permit from the county. The website also has says that specifics about individual programs will be provided on the website as soon as they are finalized.
Do we, I'm very respectful of people's religious beliefs, but do you think it's possible that they might employ people who are non-Adventists to have the facility open on Saturday? Because I imagine that might be a...
It's not being done by Adventists. They hired a contractor to come in and staff the pool and operate the pool, and the contractor is not an Adventist. It's just their Adventist policy. I asked about it at the pool lunch.
And I can say, having worked for an Adventist for decades, that it doesn't matter whether they're there or not, it's their contractor, and therefore it won't be open those times.
Also, they only have they have limited hours that they can do. So it's not like they would be able to have the pool open all day Saturday and all day Sunday anyway, because it had to be one or the other, essentially. They could have moved some hours around, but.
Right.
Also, I was at the PTA meeting on Thursday night, and I got the impression that there's no hope of hitting the January 15th date, that they don't think that they're going to get it permitted by that time. So it sounds like it's going to be later in the month or maybe even early February, depending on how fast the county moves.
And just for purposes of disclosure, I would again remind my colleagues that although I volunteer at Adventist Community Services, I do not speak for them, nor am I employed by them.
Great. Thanks for all that useful information. I hope we can get that posted on the city's recreational website. The last item is just a question for the mayor. I don't know, I know you're working on getting the time for us to be presenting the information about the license plate recognition scanners, and I don't know if we have I didn't see that in the agenda, so I wanted to see if there's a time that we have agreed upon, because a number of my constituents are actually very interested in that issue and would like to come and hear what's going on with that, because they're worried about civil liberties issues.
Right, and I had I made the inquiry, and the chief got back with a little bit of information, but we hadn't gotten to scheduling it yet. And my sense was that the police had not purchased it yet. They had the authorization to purchase, and that they felt like they needed to at least purchase it and get some information on it before they could commit to a time frame. So I need to talk with the city manager about that, and we haven't had a chance to.
Well, maybe, given that I think we have to, because it's probably an expenditure over the target, we're going to have to vote on it. It might be nice to have a briefing and understand what we're actually trying to do with it before we purchase it. I would just hate to purchase something and then decide that we don't feel like there's a constructive use that we're okay with in terms of civil liberties.
What we sometimes do, if there's procurement matters that maybe aren't simple procurement matters that the council wants to handle on the consent agenda, is we have in the past on occasion had a work session prior to the actual bid ordinance or procurement ordinance being placed on the agenda. So that's one option the council may wish to consider.
I think that'd be advisable.
Yeah, I think there are some questions about making sure that the current city policies are adhered to and the use of this new technology. And so I think at least at the information level, we need to hear what's going on and also review how that fits in with our current policies.
Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Yes, I just have a quick announcement. The county has organized a campaign called Yes Montgomery Can, and that's the website, www.yesmontgomerycan.org, and they are looking for matching contributions. They have $100,000 from an anonymous donor, looking for a match for that, to donate. You can find out all about what the activities are, but they are essentially building on the new administration's campaign to, instead of staying home on Martin Luther King's birthday, to actually do something. I urge folks to take a look at that and sign up and donate some time and or money. Thanks.
Councilmember Robinson.
I haven't brought this up before, but if anyone, maybe other folks know, and if not, Barb, could you make a note to ask Daryl what the ramifications of global meltdown in recycling demand is? I've heard this from a couple of sources that it's harder to take recyclables out to their former destination. And so that might have, not that it would have an impact on how we're mixing items in our own recycling, but I'd just like to see what's ahead for us. Thank you. That's all.
And I've just got a couple quick items. Wanted to mention that there was a very informative and well-attended set of meetings here yesterday with our District 20 delegation, and we had a turnout of over 100 people for the combination of those two meetings with our delegates, and a lot of good back and forth, and we appreciate their coming and talking with all of our residents and answering their questions and telling them what's going to be happening in the session. And along with that, I just wanted to note, particularly for my colleagues, that I'm on the Maryland Municipal League Legislative Committee. We had our meetings in the fall about the League's legislative priorities, but starting this week, as the legislature goes into session, we start looking at all of the proposed bills that come forward in the legislature, and we're going to look at our first set of them on Wednesday. And I just want to let you know I've got a list here of the types of things that come forward, and there are a couple of them on their list of the ones that they say have an even chance of passage, and included among those are bills to change permitting processes for environmental projects that might affect our ability to issue stormwater permits, and that another one is possible change in the ability to lower speed limits within our jurisdiction without going through traffic and engineering studies before doing so. So it's the types of things that could affect what we have the ability to do. I've got a list here if anybody's interested in looking at the first ones to come through. I can pass it down and we can pass it back the other way. Also, just wanted to note that there was a very nice event this morning. It was a press conference with the county executive, and Councilmember Siemens and I were there, and it was the kickoff for the renovation of 7610 Maple Avenue, which the city had contributed toward with the pilot agreement that we discussed here some months back with Montgomery Housing Partnership. But that project is hopefully getting ready to go forward. And there was a tour of the building before, and then some revised plans and drawings about what they intend to do for their project. When they talked with us, they had talked about the possibility of adding a couple floors. They have since discovered that that's not really financially viable, and they're going to be revising kind of reconfiguring the inside of the building and I think there's presently 35 units, and they're going to end up with 36 units. They're trying to combine some of the efficiencies and add some 3-bedroom units so that it'll mostly be 2- and 3-bedroom units, so that it'll be more family-friendly. Those are the types of units that are most in demand. So hopefully that project will get going soon. They've made their applications for the financing, and they'll know how that's going pretty soon. We also had meetings last week with the Mosaic project, and there was some real progress being made on location and design of that, so that should be going forward fairly soon with some good probability that there will be some nice mosaic art made by the community around the outside of the building, and we'll probably hear more about that as they progress on that project. And there was also meetings with the Washington Adventist Hospital Land Use Committee with a number of council members. I believe it was council members Snipper, Clay, and myself who were at their meeting talking with them about what they'll be doing. And I think there was some agreement on some viable things that they can be doing. There was also some good suggestions yesterday at that District 20 meeting about some other possibilities for what might happen with that land that the delegation was very interested in. So there's been some good progress on a number of fronts in terms of various projects around the city. If that's it, we'll move on to additional agenda items and agenda scheduling update. And I think all I want to do there is remind folks that next week, because of Martin Luther King Day and the inauguration, that we will be having our meeting next Wednesday, January 21st. And the main items on the agenda are the discussion of residents' requests for banning leaf blowers and our work session discussion of the strategic plan. It's now time for public comment. If there's anybody who'd like to make any comments, please identify yourself and keep your comments to 3 minutes.
My name is Robbie Kimball. I'm a resident of Ward 3, and for the last 7 or 8 years I've been on the board of the Tacoma Park Folk Festival. I'm very proud to sponsor one of the stages there as well. This comment is on behalf of the board of the Tacoma Park Folk Festival. We are very pleased to announce that after 5 years of great leadership from Kevin Adler, Kevin is actually going to use his time in a few more personally satisfying ways, and the leadership is going to be taken over, we're very glad to say, by Karen Vernon. Karen is a Ward 2 resident. She's been in Tacoma Park since 2004. She's done a lot of work with the Girl Scouts as well as with the Folk Festival over the past 3 to 4 years. Her efforts are going to allow us to keep the Folk Festival alive. As you know, this will be the 32nd annual Folk Festival. Once again, we'll be at the middle school on Piney Branch. We look forward to having Karen as our leader, and we really appreciate all the support that the festival has received over the years from the council as well as individual council members and their efforts on its behalf. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add that to get Karen, to entice her to sign up, I told her that each of the council members and everybody in the city would be very helpful for her, but particularly the council members would agree to volunteer and encourage their constituents to volunteer.
You heard it here. Is there any other public comment? Okay, then we'll move on to the city manager's comments.
Sure. I just have a couple items. I know a lot of people are here for the auditorium presentation.
And if you don't have any good news, don't tell us.
Some's good, some's not. So we'll start with the bad and kind of segue into the good. Earlier this fiscal year, I had shared with the council that we had gotten some updated information from SHA about highway user revenues. And as you may recall from that discussion, at that time, based on the information we'd received from SHA, it looked like our revenue projections for highway user revenues were actually going to come in about $35,000 less than what we had budgeted. And I had done some crystal ball projections with the council via email during the recess, and I had mentioned at that time that it wouldn't shock me if we got additional communications from SHA further revising those numbers in a downward direction, and that is in fact what happened today. SHA is now projecting that our highway user revenues will come in about $76,000 under the initial number we received from them for budgeting purposes.
And that's the current fiscal year?
That's the current fiscal year. They have also gone ahead and given us a preliminary projection for fiscal 2010, and essentially it shows highway user revenues being flat, meaning equal to the less $76,000 figure. So it's obviously something we'll continue to track, but obviously this is, it's not a huge revenue source from the city, but every little bit helps, and it's going to come in way under projections. I believe Mayor Williams and Councilmember Wright are already aware of this, but at your places at the dais this evening, I also left a copy of an email that was sent out to some residents in Ward 1. This is the Carroll Avenue project / Park Avenue. This was where the council had allocated some funds relative to a parking lot that faces onto Park. This is just informational. We'll be continuing to have some discussions with the residents, but basically the bids did come in last week. There was $25,000 budgeted for this project. Some of those funds were used to get some engineering assistance. If you take a look at on the rear side of Sarah's email, it'll show you of the 4 bids received, all were over the budgeted amount, and some quite substantially. So in her email to the residents of that area, Sarah's outlined several options, obviously, rebidding the project, making some changes, petitioning the council for additional funds, or trying to reduce the number of parking spaces. That's because the majority of the cost is attributable to a retaining wall, which is necessary. So there's no action required by the council this evening, but I did just want to give you the heads up since you've had a number of residents in the past who appeared before you about this project. So we'll continue to try to see what we can do, working with the residents to bring it more in line. Kind of on the positive news front, Councilmember Wright had inquired by email earlier today about another pedestrian-related, safety-related project that he didn't ask about in his remarks earlier this evening. This is at 410 Philadelphia and Chicago. Did want to share with the council and with the community that some of that is moving along, though a little bit slower than we would have liked. SHA has placed a work order to install 2 sets of the crosswalk paddles on either side of the crossing. You were correct, Councilmember Wright, that they have discontinued that practice in most areas, but they did make an exception in this location and will be installing crosswalk paddles. They also have issued a work order to put some thermoplastic writing actually in the roadbed, basically notifying motorists that they are about to approach a crosswalk. They will also be changing the striping on the crosswalk from the normal diagonal zebra pattern to cross-hatching, which should make it more visible. That is something they'll do when it comes back up for replacement, so they need to let the current markings wear out. One of the other things that was of interest to some of the residents was installing a median actually basically at the lane divides, basically to keep motorists from swerving around right on buses, which is something that you see quite often. The head of the traffic division for SHA was not comfortable putting in a 4-foot median. Some of the staff is pursuing kind of what's known as a quick curve. You see it, like if you go towards Bethesda on 410, you'll see this little post in the roadway. So there'll be some internal discussions among the SHA staff to see if they can at least maybe put some type of other barrier to keep people from swirling around the buses. So it is moving along, Councilmember Wright, but a little bit more slowly. And I'll reduce this to an email and send it to you in case you'd like to forward that on to your constituents.
Can I interrupt you for a second? So why aren't they doing that at Ethan Allen and Elm? Just all the same issues. In fact, it's a tighter intersection. We've asked them to put in the crosshatches. We've asked them to put in notification that there's a crosswalk approaching, and it's, next to a major intersection. And there's a bus stop there, and people drive around it all the time. And we've had, several people almost get hit.
I will pursue that with the staff. The one thing is one of the people that we had worked with in SHA has recently been promoted, and I know in talking to Alana, she thought that was a good thing, so maybe we might be able to make some progress since there's some different supervisory personnel, but we will pursue that, Councilmember Clay.
We might also indeed, because Valerie Irvin was also engaged in this, because when she walked around the campus, she saw that students were getting off the buses, to pedestrian access, so we might also get Valerie on the same page about pushing SHA.
I confirm that, so that when you call them the crosswalk paddles, are those the things that stand up?
Yes.
That are on kind of
on a little post.
Post or sort of flat metal things?
Correct.
They've stopped installing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've seen those, I personally think they're very effective, but you see lots of them mowed down in the roadway. I know there's one in your ward that, yes, that just got destroyed. This was a commitment they had made to put these in this location prior to changing their policy. I think on an exception basis, we can certainly pursue those in other locations if council members would like us to, but as a general matter of practice, I feel like they're getting mowed down all the time and constantly being replaced.
Well, what I've heard is people think it's a waste of money because they are mowed down so regularly.
The only other thing I just wanted to note for the council, 2 additional items. It's also at your places at the dais. It's a memo that I received from our planning staff regarding the commercial revitalization overlay zone. This is an issue that arose during the staff's discussion with Park and Planning, basically about some conflicting provisions in the county zoning code, and they are looking for, I guess, what the city might like to see in terms of which interpretation should we follow. Once again, I don't want to really belabor it. I know you're already a little bit behind schedule, but the planning staff will be following up with you on this matter, but I just wanted to go ahead and distribute this information, so when you got the email, hopefully it might make a little bit more sense to you. And the last item I had is just to let the council know that our Public Works Director had received several emails late last week from a city resident expressing some concern about some erosion and some stormwater-related problems near Washington Adventist Hospital. Staff has been in communication with the management of the hospital, and we'll continue to be discussing those issues with them. But just wanted to let you know, Marty Idner, who has appeared before the council before, had contacted Ms. Braithwaite. So we've been in contact with Jerry Stocks as well as Dean Teague, and I believe Mr. Teague may try to come address the council next week just to give you an idea of what they're doing to pursue the problem.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions of the city manager? Okay, we'll move on to our next item, which is a presentation on the plans for the renovation of the auditorium.
Pleased to have staff from iStudio and Cultural Development Corporation here tonight. As you know, in late November, you approved a contract authorization to hire iStudio for architectural services related to the renovation of this lovely room. And an enormous amount of preliminary work has been done already by the architects. Some of their ideas and concerns were brought to the auditorium committee on January 6th. At the meeting were about 4 or 5 members of that committee, as well as a number of city staff people who have interest in how this room works. And so the Rick Schneider from iStudio and his staff will be showing you some of these kind of designs, some of the changes to the concept plan that was originally done to this room, and identify a few issues that need to be addressed. I've identified a couple of those in the blue sheet. The first item that we would like your direction on after this discussion is, should the city pursue LEED certification for this project? And the second is, should the schedule be delayed to allow for additional cost estimating to take place? I think that one of the key things as you go through this and hear, the city has budgeted $1.2 million for the project. That does not include the amounts for some of the technical equipment that go along from the cable city TV funds that help with the cameras and that kind of thing. Nevertheless, it's a fairly constricted amount of money. Of that $1.2 million, $128,840 is for architectural services, and the remaining amount is to pay for the construction and any changes that you may authorize. We believe the funds are sound, but we'd like to make sure that we're moving on these quickly so that the state doesn't see a pot of money that it likes to take. I've been in communication with state officials, and continue to be in communication with state officials on these. We have funds for this project from state bond bill funds, from program open space funds, for federal EDI funds for the HVAC system. And we have, there'll be a discussion of the $150,000 from the Washington Venice Hospital on the January 26th agenda, I believe. So I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up about the funding, that's the amount that we have. And so anything that you decide that's extra or that may reduce or increase those costs, we do need to take into account. The other thing I wanted to bring your attention to that will be discussed this evening does have to do with the project schedule. Right now we're on schedule for this presentation. If some of the options that are discussed tonight take effect, there will be several weeks delay in that schedule. At this point, under the original schedule, substantial completion of construction was near the end of September. So I just want to kind of put that in your frame as you go through and listen to the discussion this evening.
And the anticipated start of the project?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're working on it. In terms of anticipated notice to proceed with construction, the date had been March 23rd. So, with that, I'd like to invite you down into the lovely seats, and we'll have a presentation from next
And if you can just remind me, my memory banks are full on acronyms.
Yes.
EDI funds, what's EDI?
That's it's basically earmarks through the housing.
Yeah, I believe it stands for Economic Development Initiative. The
Right.
council may recall that we received just under $250,000 under the same program for the construction of the Computer Learning Center.
Right. And those funds are actually very useful because you can spend them right, you can just get the money right off the bat. You don't have to do lots of matches and that kind of thing. But it is targeted for the HVAC system and some lighting. So we have to
I just
keep track of
remember it
those.
being labeled EDI before.
Yes. I'd like to turn it over to Rick.
Maybe after we do this project, we won't have to come down here. And not only will we be able to see from up there, but we'll actually be able to ask questions of Larry.
I guess we're set to go. Great. Mr. Mayor, City Council, first of all, thanks very much for your time. It's really actually been a pleasure working with your very capable staff. We've been working very closely with them over the last month or so to further develop the Concept D plan that was the approved scheme. To that end, we've sort of listened very closely to the community process you went through prior to that, and our decision-making process has really been led by the following principles: providing you with a space that's both, that's useful, flexible, artful, and green. I'll hand the microphone over very briefly to Ann Corbett, our theater design consultant, who's going to talk very briefly about the priorities for performance space that also helped us in the decision-making process during the design. And then we'll jump very quickly into plans and look at some renderings.
Does it matter where I stand? No. I feel like I don't want to stand. You can watch me either way. It's exciting. Well, one of the things that started off the process was we wanted to direct the staff to help us incorporate a set of priorities in terms of artistic uses
obviously the council function is the first priority. That has to work at 100%, period. But in terms of its artistic usefulness, we really wanted to make some choices so that we could have a space that was very supportive to a couple of uses, could also be used for other things, but we wanted to make some logical decisions around that. And so in order of priority, we determined that, obviously, like I said, the council use was the first priority. That second priority would be spoken word, meaning poetry readings, performance poetry, lectures, other presentations that focused on literally spoken word. Next would be music, with an emphasis on acoustic music, whether that was classical, folk, jazz, etc. Not that you could not do amplified music in here, but there were a number of concerns about that, and that would be a limited use. Third, in artistic, was dance, focusing on student dance recitals as the sort of stereotypical use, and hence, for instance, we would look to create a stage area that is safe to dance on, but is not a professional dance floor per se. Finally, film, so that movie nights and a film festival would be adequately accommodated. And then lastly, really the only thing that kind of takes a little bit of a back seat is theater. There were, as far as I know, no identified regular theatrical users, and that's much more difficult to accommodate. Once again, not to say that you could not produce a play in the room when we get done, but we are not designing it such that you will see high production value live professional theater in this space as a primary activity. Once again, the point being that we wanted to create a priority list, so as mentioned, with limited funds and logistics and practicality, we could make, through design development, some decisions more easily as to design choices, equipment choices, etc. That covers it.
I hope that makes it clear enough, at least what our priorities were as we were starting to lay out such technical things as AV, lighting, and the stage itself. And I'll move very quickly then through some of the presentation materials here. We've got a multitude of them. Hopefully this whole process is intended to kind of solve that issue. Behind me I've got the screen for slides, and then if you need to make further comments from the dais, I've got a set of boards over here, and you've got 11 by 17 color printouts that also show the exact same thing, so you can speak from those if you need to. We'll begin, I think, with the plan by the previous architect, the accepted concept D, and I'll highlight a couple of major areas or key areas where we developed further what you had approved with, again, working very closely with your staff to give you, again, a further developed plan. Those main areas are changes to the ramp and access entries here at the main entrance, changes to the storage area here, and then the third area is really pretty much the ceiling as laid out in their scheme was very simplified, and we're looking for something that's a little bit more able to handle all the technical sort of stuff we're putting in the room at this point in time. So as I go through the plan, those are the three major areas that you'll see the changes happen. There are also some changes to the entrance in the rear as well, but for the most part, you're looking at this area, and then the ceiling itself. So that having been said, I guess we'll go ahead and move on. The auditorium itself, in our plan, has a revised entrance here. We've gone with two sets of double doors to create a nice sound trapping vestibule at the entrance. We've switched the ramp so that instead of coming into the auditorium, going up the ramp into an unsecured back storage area, The ramp, the handicap ramp, is now in the exact same location pretty much as the short steps up to the back of house, as well as the major entrance. One of the keys to ADA design is coming up with respectful entrances that are common to everyone. So everyone's kind of entering from the same place. That was the rationale behind that. We also tried to be as judicious as possible with the space. In reorganizing this, too, we were actually able to grab a little bit more storage space back here. We now have a storage closet, as well as a small hallway and more storage space that could potentially act as a green room for acts and things that are happening on the main stage. Secondly, I spoke about the storage area there. The seating has remained just about what you saw in the original plan in Concept D. We've got 149 fixed seats. We actually removed the front row of seats. Those will be a set of 7 removable theater seats that will allow you to do a couple of things. One is to provide additional handicapped seating when needed, but then also to be able to set up a table situation like this right here without people sort of bumping up against them. The reason for that is that the stage is actually moved out to give you significantly more stage. That means all this stuff gets pushed back further. So you'll notice that. That's correct. You can still have those seats. 149 fixed, 7 removable, 3 designated handicap per the Concept D plan, and then additional optional handicap where those removable seats are. And we're working out or fine-tuning sort of the location of those as preferred. The platform itself, again, I think as in the Concept D plan, will be a nice medium to dark wood-toned stage with recessed panels with access that allows to get all the technical stuff in there. And that's stuff that Jeff Schneider from CVA is working with very closely. The dais itself is going to be a custom millwork piece. It'll be removable. It'll be able to break down to 5 different pieces. But we'll have some spring-loaded sort of wheels that allow us to pop it up and then literally slide it back into the back area there, very similar to what was designed before. But the idea is to work very closely with the millworker to make this dais flexible, but also to keep it from looking like a very temporary piece of furniture. So when you pop those spring-loaded wheels down, this thing will sit down, nest together very well, and have the gravitas of a city council dais. So that's the intention there. That dais itself, too, is going to house all of the stuff that will help you sort of do your jobs a little bit better. Microphones, cubbies for technical stuff, also recessed areas for your laptops that will all be dialed into the screens and the projectors that will be projecting to the public. So in the original plan, Concept D, there were actually 5 locations for projection screens identified. One was on each of these 2 sidewalls here, but then also on the inside sides of the stage for you all to look at, and then the 5th was going to be this one right here in the middle. Well, it seemed pretty obvious to us that that would be sort of a pain for you all to be sitting at the dais and then trying to look sideways at a presentation while the audience is out there and cameras are catching you either the back of your head or the side of your head. It seemed to make much more sense if we could come up with a better solution for that. The solution was keep the 2, keep projection screens there, keep a projection screen in the middle, but then instead of providing the 2 side projection screens, that you would have these bays within your dais for laptops that would show you what's happening. We're going to work very closely with the millwork folks so that laptops will sit in there very nicely and still give you plenty of workspace as well. So again, we've got all the technical stuff that we're working on very closely with Jeff at CVA. The other thing that's interesting to note is that we've designed it really, or working on designing it, so that laptops will peak up just above the top of the dais. That's really kind of a critical little detail so that people in the audience know that you've got a laptop in front of you and that you're looking at that and not really falling asleep. That sounds funny, but it's actually a very practical issue. There was a lawsuit very recently where some folks sued a city council because it appeared that they were not paying attention. And the city actually lost the lawsuit. So we're keeping all of this in mind for you. In addition to the, I guess I should talk a little bit about the different presentation scenarios that we've got here. So we've got the stage, we've got the dais up here, and typically you've got a table set down here for people to make presentations. There's also a location for a podium for this type of presentation, similar to what we have here, except that it won't be backed up the aisle. It'll be at the end of this aisle here so that folks can line up down the aisle and make their presentation. And it also doesn't conflict with the tables that are going on right there. There's also a location for that same podium to be moved up here for presentations that are not city council presentations, rather folks standing on the stage, say gesturing at a screen just like this, possibly even for the police to give their morning meetings, unless they prefer to have the podium down here and turned around facing the audience. So that's a few different scenarios there. The other scenario is that the platform, or the that little presentation podium would be right in the middle of the stage here for, say, a poetry reading or something along those lines for folks to speak directly to the audience. So those are some of your main presentation scenarios. Again, for film, we've got the central roll-down screen there for your film festival or your screenings. Folks can sit in the audience and look directly at a centrally located, very large screen. You'll also have two screens, one on either side here, again, as I mentioned, for other presentations. Lighting itself, we're looking at 60-foot candles to make sure that video can pick up the faces of everyone in the audience. But we've tried to design the lighting so that it'll be energy efficient as well, and that you can hit not just the council presentation lighting needs, but you can also provide for theater lighting needs. Theater lighting needs are such that we don't want just a ton of lighting out here. We actually want lower lighting that can be dimmed from, say, 50 to 25 to 15, 10, and 5%, depending on what type of performance you have going on there. So what we've done is we've actually designed a lighting scheme that incorporates fluorescents that are sprinkled throughout the auditorium here that will give you the general overall lighting. But then when you're not having that type of presentation, but you're going to a more theater performance-oriented use, the house lights that are fluorescent go off, and you go to house lights that are down lights similar to what you have here. So it's a very kind of similar scheme here where we split between fluorescent and down lights. Again, too, so that you're not so that you're able to dim the incandescent lights, the down lights, and turn the fluorescent lights off for performances. Sure. We are actually. We're looking at technical. We're looking at the technicals that allow us to basically have a few programmable scenes, so it'll be somewhat user-friendly to folks that are coming in and using this thing. And we're also still, I should say, working out, fine-tuning the aspects of who's going to use it and how, and that's something we've been working with your staff on. So that has yet to be finalized, but we're getting there. Acoustics. Our acoustical engineer came in and tested probably about a week after, after we met with you the very first time, and he gave the room itself an NC rating of 30 and 40. The 30 was when the fan that's in the police station offices downstairs is off, and the NC 40 is when it is on. We're probably not going to achieve anything significantly better than that, given the fact that we can't have access to the police and we can't change out their fan in this contract. If we could possibly get into changing the NC rating. NC, the noise criteria, as what the NC stands for. The 30 is typically known as quiet and it's typically appropriate for general presentations. NC 40, Charlie, Chris, this is for you. NC 40 is going to be more geared towards, it's known as moderately noisy, and it's typically geared towards public uses. However, you will see a significant reduction in the noise that you all are experiencing up here, since we're moving these air intake louvers up into the ceiling, and we're going to open them up so that you won't hear nearly as much noise as you currently hear now. So that's the general idea. You're going to be much quieter as a result of changing that out. That having been said, the new air handler that's going in there is going to go on to an existing central chiller. It'll be quieter, much more energy efficient, and it'll give us a nice comfortable space here. Finishes, I'll just kind of touch briefly on those. We haven't worked out to any great detail the finishes, but what you will see as you start to kind of go, as I start to go through some of these other shots of the model view of the 3D model that we did of this, the rendering, you'll start to see a neutral and a cool blue type finish palette that we're looking at sort of two different options there. The other thing I would say about finishes is that we're really focusing with our knowledge base in green materials. Looking for high recycled content, local when it's possible, and then we want it to be as healthy as possible for the people that are going to be using the space, so no off-gassing, non-toxic materials, and then also to the environment as well, so rapidly renewable type materials. So bamboo would be a good example of that, or wood from well-managed forests that haven't been clear-cut. In addition, I should say, in terms of the finishes, what we're looking at is a scheme that takes these acoustic panels that the acoustic engineer has told us are going to be required in order to help us balance out the sound in this space. And we're looking at something artful there that maybe starts to talk a little bit about Takoma Park. One of the ideas that we're exploring right now is a series of fabric-wrapped panels that are silk-screened with images maybe gathered here from these old photographs of Takoma Park, so that, you know, in moving the photographs out to allow for the panels to come in, we bring that content back in here. So you maybe have this nice kind of read of the history of Takoma Park here, somewhat abstracted on these panels. It's something we're exploring right now. You'll see that in some of the renderings that I show, but I wanted to at least mention that. As you look at the plans, you'll notice that we've got fabric-wrapped panels pretty much all the way around the perimeter, and then along the sides and back of the stage itself, too. Our acoustic engineer tells us that in order to balance things out a little bit more, we need to get a lot more soft surfaces on your vertical, on your walls, and we want to change out some of your absorptive ceiling to be a little bit harder to balance things out some. To that end, what we're actually looking to do in the ceiling is to go from a fully enclosed ceiling to one where think of the ceiling as a series of clouds or islands floating up there with narrow gaps between that will help us get a little bit more live sound in the ceiling there. And it'll also be a place for us to bring fresh air, cool air down in through louvers. So I talked about the auditorium finishes and acoustics. Let's take a quick look through some of these renderings now that'll give you hopefully a sense of how the space will read and feel. The color correction was a little tricky on here, so I hope you'll also refer to your 11 by 17 color images now or when you go home tonight. And we've also got a series of these boards which we can either leave here if you'd like or we can take back with us. The first rendering here is a cross section with a perspective, so you get a sense of, in black, what you're cutting through. This is the volume here. This is the slightly sloped floor, and it goes flat at the bottom. This is the new stage, the back wall. This is actually the slab of the roof above, and then you're seeing the trusses that support that. Okay? Well, you can't see those now because the ceiling is covering all that up. That all makes sense to you. We're looking to come with a new ceiling that pops up when it needs to allow us to push things like lights and PA system up higher out of your sort of visual line of sight, thank you, is what I'm looking for. So the people aren't looking at the council and then seeing a whole lot of lights and PA and speakers right there. So we pushed a piece of the ceiling up in order to allow us to do that. Then the piece that's out over the audience actually picks up on that high point and then slopes down a little bit to allow for the right, I guess you call it sight lines, for the speakers themselves to reach people. Okay, so we've come up with an articulated ceiling that starts to do the very functional things that we needed to do. Getting stuff out of your line of sight, but still allowing, those things to get back to the audience. So again, that sloped ceiling here out in the audience that rises to the middle. And architecturally, we think this is going to work very nicely too, because you have this space that gets very narrow toward the back and then opens up in the front. The cross section of this room will do the same thing. It'll start at a comfortable but intimate level back there and then rise to sort of a much more open level right here where I'm standing. So the ceiling will be popped up about 13, 14 feet right here. Then back over the stage, it'll drop down a little bit more. You can see the ceiling right there. And there will be lights there, both fluorescent and incandescent, that'll provide you with task lighting at the dais. In addition to that, similar to these cans right here that I'm pointing to up here in the ceiling, you've got lighting right here that will shoot back to allow lighting for the stage, but also lighting for you during videotaping. And we're exploring a couple different lighting scenarios with our theater design consultants, both energy efficient and low cost, because it's hard for us to get both in the same, where first cost is low, but also, energy efficient. So we're exploring a couple scenarios there and seeing what we can do to work within the budget. I'll briefly touch on that. We're looking at LED lights, which are very energy efficient. They use, a fraction of what standard, say, incandescent lights or PAR lights that you would use in stage lighting use. The only problem is they're really expensive. So we're trying to do some of the cost-benefit analysis for you and see what we can actually get within the budget, and then possibly even come back with a scenario that might increase the budget, but look at energy cost savings that pay back, fairly quickly, and then continue on into the life of the building since you actually own this. So I've talked about the ceiling panels, a little about the lighting and the AV. The acoustic panels, I think you can start to see in this section. They're not very detailed at this size, but you'll see a little bit more detail in your handouts. These are the panels that we're looking at, again, subtly silk screening, maybe 2 different colors of similar value so that they don't sort of pop out at you, but they're more of a subtle read. As you look at them, you might start to see some of the images sort of emerge from those panels. Again, taking something very mundane and functional and doing something artful with it as well. We can probably go through the perspectives here as well, the other perspectives. This is standing over there on the left aisle as you walk in, and then looking towards where I'm standing right here. I would, in essence, be the silhouette of this person right here standing at the podium. And then you all are sitting right over there where this guy is right behind there. So what you're seeing here is that angled ceiling, the piece that pops up to allow for your speakers and your lighting, and then the piece that drops down over the dais, too. We've also incorporated in that sort of cloud over the dais and over the stage a couple of gaps in the ceiling so that we can provide places for theater folks to attach lighting and other stuff that they may need, and provide them with somewhat basic, simple access to that, but without getting rid of the ceiling altogether. We're trying to, again, I think, strike a good balance between the gravitas of a finished space at the, for a city council, but provide enough sort of areas for theater folks to come in and access the ceiling rigging that we're putting up there. The next perspective, we're in the rear looking towards the front. You can see all the seats here. The council dais there, which again is a little more of a U-shaped form as opposed to the sort of shallow C that you have currently. The reason we're able to actually get those couple of extra sort of chairs on each side, again, is that the stage is moving out. There's more stage area. Also, we're eliminating that curved back wall, so you get a little bit more real estate back there too. And that's all part of the original concept D that we carried through into this point. The seal back there, the movable walls there that allowed us to sort of slide the walls out of the way, take the dais apart, put it back into the storage space, then bring it back out again. Okay. The dais itself, we're thinking will be finished in a nice kind of medium to medium dark tone of wood, again to give us a little bit of gravitas, have it look nice. Maybe with some other metal details to kind of give it, again, a nice sort of finished look to it, and also to help us hide joints, because that's going to be the tricky part with that since it's in pieces. I'm not sure what else I would point to here except for the fact that we've got the 2 roll-down screens, one on either side. One of the things that Chris really, my colleague Chris really commented about that, it's nice to have roll-down screens that roll back up and allow you to either put artwork there or something else, but at least not to have this sort of blank sort of screen of a large projection TV screen there, or video screen. That's the front perspective. I think there's one more here that shows you what we're looking to work on, that entrance there where the entry vestibule is, right outside in the lobby as you come in. The idea here is that if you walk in the front, there's the lobby desk as it currently stands, and you're looking out that set of doors that goes out back here. Yes. This is actually, this is a shot of your lobby right outside here, and you're standing at the desk looking towards the outside, which is out that way. The guy's walking on the vending machine. That's right. This guy right here, that's where the vending machines currently are. And currently, to get into the council chambers, you sort of walk back this way and then go back behind this wall here. Well, we've now made it so that the handicap ramp and the stairs that give you access to the back of house, the chambers back there, are in the same location, and they're adjacent to the main entrance too. There's a nice opportunity here too, as we sort of pull everything away and open up this lobby a little bit more, to pull in a little bit lower ceiling there, and maybe there's a nice opportunity to sort of announce this new auditorium space that you've got here. And, maybe a place for some playbills or something that tells people what upcoming events are happening here. So we're looking for a way to really kind of give you a somewhat ceremonial entrance to the auditorium beyond what's there now, which is literally just a set of double doors. So that's the intention there. There is a column that I should point out too, that actually we've located through surveying and looking at previous drawings, that's a little bit different than where it was located in the Concept D plan. So we wouldn't actually be able to put the ramp in the location of the Concept D plan anyway because of that column right there. It actually sits right where the ramp was. And you can back up to that. We found that the column actually sits right in the middle of the ramp, right about where I'm pointing. Is that right, Chris? Right about there? So you wouldn't be able to put the ramp in that location. So that gives you, I think, hopefully a general overview of the proposed designs, again, building on the Concept D that's been worked on for so long and developing it further to what we believe is a pretty reasonable scheme here that hopefully, again, serves your needs, is useful, flexible, green, and artful at the same time. Maybe I can address the green comments very quickly. We are looking to design this thing green from the start. It's something we already know, instinctually. We've been doing this for a while. However, there's the option here before it gets too late to actually, before it gets too late to start implementing design processes that take LEED certification into account, to actually go for LEED certification under the LEED commercial interiors designation. We can start doing that now. It adds time. Of course, everything that you do in life takes time and money. And I think we've outlined fairly well what the time and the money commitments would be. We're still on track to hit our deadlines according to the original scheme, and you will still be delivered a very green product. I think the benefit with LEED is that you get a certification and the added process of coordination and attention to detail that's required by all of the processes required for certification there. One of the great things that I've always said too, or that I've always loved about the certification processes, is that it requires more coordination between architects and engineers than you would find in the standard processes, and it often costs a little bit more time and effort up front, but you see that payback during construction typically, where there are fewer questions that need to be answered because there's been more coordination up front. And then it continues to pay itself back over the life of the project in health to the people using it, energy efficiency, energy cost savings, et cetera, et cetera. And we've outlined that here to the point where we're looking at probably about 3 weeks added to the design time. There's a significant amount of documentation that the architects and the engineers need to do in order to provide the paperwork that the U.S. Green Building Council needs to provide certification, and that's what that time would encompass. There's additional modeling that the engineers need to provide, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've stated in our recommendations here that it looks like it could be a really good thing for Tacoma Park to do if you find that you are able to find the funding certainly for that, and that it works within the schedule. Certainly we know that you're tied to a tight budget. We're happy and prepared to move forward with LEED CI if you'd like to. Otherwise, you still will be getting a green project. It just won't be certified. The only other thing I would say is that the commissioning was not something that was, commissioning is still something that we are planning on doing during the project, which is to make sure that engineers and contractors are working very closely to do additional testing beyond the baseline that you would typically find for installing the new mechanical systems that we're putting in and the lighting systems, et cetera, to make sure not just that they're functioning to baseline, but that they're functioning at, at best capacity to get you the energy cost savings that they say that they're intended to, when you buy Energy Star systems and you install them. So the commissioning is still intended to be something you could do even if you don't decide to move forward with LEED. So I think that covers the green issues. If you have any questions about that or any of the design issues, I'd be happy to sort of, go over those. Otherwise, I can, I think just a brief review of the schedule would probably be in order. Oh, the back entrance as well. Sure. We can go back to the plans. Let's go to the original plan. So the original plan, the Concept D plan here, has a back entrance and a vestibule back here. The only problem is that it doesn't take into account the fact that you have a low ceiling in this area that would require additional work, potentially structural work, because of that. That line is right about where I'm drawing it here, where the low ceiling is on this side of the line, and the higher ceiling is on this side of the line. And if you step outside, you'll see that really easily. There's a walkway that, that goes along here, and then there's a balcony above, and then it's open in this area here where they're proposing this ramp and the stairs as well. What we've done is propose something that's much smaller scale and much simpler as sort of an auxiliary entrance that doesn't require us to go in and do additional work here in the ceiling and works within the, sort of works within these existing lines. It also allows people to circulate around this area, whereas the previous plan sort of cut that off. So we're looking again at a very simple auxiliary entrance here, still with sound attenuating doors there, but just, a quick little sort of front stoop with a couple of stairs there. Sure. Right. It can, but as we spoke with staff and started to observe what was happening, we realized that most people coming to functions here are parking out back and then coming into the lobby and then going in here. So it seemed as though you were probably going to see most folks coming in that major entrance right over there, and that this was ideal for, again, a mid-performance sneak into the back when a performance is underway type of place. And that's most likely what you'll do. You'll close down this front entrance and then divert people to the auxiliary entrance in the rear there and not interrupt performances by bringing them around front. But that just makes sense as your main entrance because folks are coming in there. It's also got that nice breakout space at the lobby, and it's got a control point there with your desk right there. So it makes the most sense, I think, in that location. Anything else that I forgot? I'll ask my colleagues too to jump in if I've forgotten anything. Oh, sure. I was going to go over schedule briefly. I think the next steps really involve, after our presentation today, we're looking to go for our design development or 50% cost estimate per the contract. There's a second cost estimate that's intended to take place at the end of the construction documents. One of the proposals we had, or recommendations for you to consider, was that currently the schedule calls for going out to bid with contractors at the same time that we send out the 100% cost estimate, which means that we're looking to check and see that we're on budget at the same time as we're asking contractors to come back with their numbers. What we're proposing is that in order to actually make good use of that 100% cost estimate, that we allow for a 3-week period in there, 2 weeks for the cost estimator to get back to us with 100%, then a week for us to roll any potential changes into the final documents, and then go out for bid with the contractors at that point in time. It's, we can go either way with that, but it seemed to us that it would make sense, we could make use of the 100% cost estimate in a better way that way, and have it actually impact the work we're doing before we go to contractors and ask for contract bids. Exactly, and the intention is to minimize change orders. It pushes the schedule back, we estimated 3 weeks, but again, the idea is hopefully to avoid schedule changes due to change orders and cost overruns due to change orders. So we put that for you as well.
Did you review the height of the stage for this one? Has that changed?
Yeah, we've actually brought the stage height down just a little bit. I think we were at about 20, 21 inches, and we brought it down to 18. What the 18 inches allowed us to do was to stay within requirements that allow us to get the requirements for a platform that keep us from having to put extra, railings, handicap. It also limits the amount of ramp that we need to put in there, and we've squeezed in the ramp, just the right amount of ramp that we need without going into the lobby too far in order to keep us from having to sort of take up a whole lot more space with a ramp that has a switchback and a landing and all that kind of thing. So. Yeah, but we're well within that limit. Our limit really was more in terms of the layout of spaces. We were going to run into having to have a landing because we needed more run, and we didn't have enough room to get all the 18-foot run in there, because you need, at 1 to 12, to go up 18 inches, I need 18 feet of run in the ramp. And we've got it working out just right now, so it works out just fine. And 18 inches, that's a good stage height. So our theater consultants are telling us that's aces right there. Okay. Great, thanks. And I guess we'll just sit down at the table here.
And you didn't mention the control of the trap doors out there, that the mayor has a little push button?
You're not the first person to bring that up. We were told that was a programmatic element to consider.
Maybe if we can just get, first off, any of the questions about the body of the presentation, if there were any further questions about any of the details of that, and then maybe we can get into things like the schedule and the question about lead certification. So first, does anybody have questions about kind of the logistics, the architecture of what they presented to us? Councilmember Clay.
I have one comment and one question. My comment is, as I heard you read the priorities, I thought, gosh, I would do that in the exact opposite order, because musical comedy should be, the first thing for.
Oh, but we're providing that. We get the air handler cranked up.
Anyway, and the council should be served. But no, this all looks great. Guys did a great job. I love it. My question is, the back entry has changed. Those are steps there?
Correct.
So it won't be wheelchair accessible.
That's correct.
And there's no way to make it wheelchair accessible.
We can add a ramp back again, but we start to get into the same issues that we had previously, which are that we eliminate the circulation around the atrium there. And as an auxiliary entrance, the main impetus behind that was that your main entrance is already ramped and ADA accessible.
Sure, but if I'm in a wheelchair and I'm coming in, I'm going around, and especially if I'm coming in late, I'm going around and in front of everybody, and then coming up to these seats up here in the front, because then there are no wheelchair accessible sites that are kind of right in on the front here. But if you came in the back, you could park back here, in this couple of spots here along this back line. Okay, thank you.
If I might, we did go through quite a lot of discussion with John Salmon, who's a handicap ADA specialist from Tacoma Park, who's on the auditorium committee. As we discovered where the column was located and all of the implications for that. And the most important thing is that what is perceived to be the main entrance be that. We were looking at a variety of other options. At this point, just because of the very constricted space, and if you go out there and you see how the overhead walkways really do make a difference on the height at that back corner, this did seem like the best option for us.
I wasn't suggesting we remove the handicap accessibility from the front entrance. Just lamenting the loss of it from the back.
No, and we also.
When we take a break after we finish with this item, if anybody wants to go out there, I can point out the spot that's causing the problem with the ceiling.
Awesome.
And on that the back auxiliary entrance, those are walls on the outside, is that correct? Going down to and enclosing the steps?
No.
The auxiliary entrance?
No. In fact, what we're looking to do is provide, again, sort of a doorstep there that's as minimal as possible, because you've already got a lot of stuff going on there architecturally, a curved wall, a bunch of angled walls. We're looking at, again, 18-inch platform with very minimal handrails that don't compete with the handrails around the atrium. They just are intended to disappear.
So it's a little ledge that comes up above the thing? I mean, you walk up 3 steps.
You walk up 3 steps. There's a platform with handrails on each side.
Handrails, okay.
Yep, the handrails are disappearing handrails. The idea there is to make them go away. In terms
and
of
kids
other
can't
materials,
hide there.
like, for example, glass or cable, so that they're very minimal visual
I
impact.
understand. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I like glass panels. You got to clean them, but you don't see them. Other questions, Councilmember Wright.
Where do we design in these wonderful pieces of furniture that we have over here on the side that hold the agenda items, and occasionally, I'm joking, the table, frequently when we have, or not frequently, occasionally when we have events that, or testimony where there's a large number of people, we need to sign in locations, and we do actually need to have that information there available to the public. So have we thought about how that would be incorporated into the space? Because I hope we don't retain those tables and that thing.
Sure. We're just at the point where we're getting into that level of detail with those items. We got a lot of big picture stuff. That's a good point. That's one of the next things to sort of take a look at.
Yeah, and actually, that was one of the things that was discussed about at the rear entrance, that there's a good amount of room here for, a lot of that, next to those steps, for some of that at that entrance, as well as kind of a lot more flexibility in the lobby and with the double door system. So it is something that we've been talking about, how the logistics of that would work.
And could you just give me a sense for how, because I am concerned about the film festival and them having a way to project. Compared to the screen we have now, what are we talking about? Do we have a general sense of the size of the screen that would come down in that middle section for something like a movie?
Jeff Schneider could speak to that. Essentially, you're going to have a larger screen.
That's the right
Here's
answer.
a bus, should I just jump under it?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared. I don't have the size of the screen with me, actually. All the screens are going to be 16 by 9. This one will be THX size,
That's the
approved
report.
size, so the people in the back won't have eye fatigue and the people in the front won't have eye fatigue. It will probably be twice what you have there, and approximately that size over there, but in the 16 by 9 format. Most of the laptops people are buying these days, and definitely all the DVDs are of that format.
And I have a question that goes with that. In terms of the area for the laptop, the screen up here, is there any sense that you're designing something that has some flexibility in terms of future-proofing for the type of laptop, the type of screen, the size, whatever it is? As I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, gee, maybe at some point somebody might have the equivalent of today's iMac, where it's all in one and it's maybe taller, whereas a laptop that's kind of folded down more, the ability to have that flexibility.
Well,
Will it be one of those elevating things, or will it be fixed and you'd essentially have to do blocks to build it up?
The idea right now is to do just sort of a shallow recess at the back. The desk, for one thing, the desk is going to be deeper, excuse me, than what you have now, and so the recess won't take away necessarily space from your workspace there. But just to sort of recess the top surface of the desk a little bit to set the monitor down and into your line of sight there. I don't know that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like monitor. Somebody's concept of monitor today might not be the concept of monitor in 10 years, and how much flexibility will be built in or 2 years.
The common practice these days is, and this is what they've followed, is you have a rectangular cutout in there with the well in it, and it's going to be rectangular. So whatever fits in the hole will be the limitation of the size of the thing that you put in.
But in terms of height, there will be the ability.
Height, the bottom level is adjustable with pins, so we can go up and down a little bit. We're going to need to do that to size them anyway for whichever monitors we pick, which we have.
Adjustable with pins is all the answer I need. Did you have other questions?
Well, now you've raised another one. You may not know this, but I take mine everywhere. And the correct ergonomic height for typing is actually lower than for writing.
So let me make
start to get
clarification.
into the, exactly.
You may have
how-
two in front of you.
Let me make clarification. The screens that'll be in front of you are just monitors. They're not laptops.
Okay.
Rick stated that. They're just dummy dummy screens, just like on their desktop Dell. They all have the same thing on them, so you'll see what's on out here.
Okay.
As far as the laptops go, they'll be ones that you carry in, and you plug into 3 sets of jacks that are up there. You pull the cables out, plug it into your laptop. So you'll be working off your laptop. There's not going to be a keyboard drawer.
Somebody else controls the screen in front of us.
Somebody else controls the screen.
Okay.
What you see on that screen will be what the public sees on these screens right here. Right. What you see on your laptop, you can control, and nobody else will see it unless you want them to.
Well, we do have, this is all streamed, so with a slight delay, I can actually watch myself, so I can see myself a few minutes ago if I wanted to sometimes. It's pretty unnerving. I've done it. But we may want to have a little bit further discussions about exactly what height and, the chairs, for example, don't work very well with this particular design. And, I mean, this is a real level of detail way beyond tonight.
I do have one follow-up question. Just, have you seen these kind of movable daises before? Because I am concerned. I mean, it sounds great, the pop-up wheels. I'm just picturing in 5 years, 3 years, that thing breaks, and then, it just is, everything looks hokey. And have we seen really movable, high-quality daises that you feel confident in?
The mill worker we're working with is very adept at this. They've got a lot of experience with movable furniture that's intended to be just this, which is, looks like it's permanent when it's in place, and it's durable. They know what our specs are, which are that this thing moves back and forth once every single week. So, that's pretty demanding, and we're working with them to design something that will specifically fit this use. So, yes.
And I had a question about that, because I'm a contractor, I'm a woodworker, I know the trade-offs, and you can get more of what you're talking about, and it tends to be that the weight goes up. And I was wondering if all this is going to be designed thinking that it might be 200-pound people who are moving all this around and trying to do it in 10 minutes.
No, I would expect that it's
As in
being in 5 sections,
people.
right? Being in 5 sections, I think we're pretty sure that this thing's going to be movable by one person at a time.
The other thing we discussed operationally is that it would be moved once a week, regardless, by city staff.
Right.
It's not to be moved by
Anybody.
Joe User, art guy, who's here for tonight, is going to move your dais, but instead that city staff would, in a sense, put it away for the week when it is being used for other things, and then reset it Monday morning.
So you're saying that kids couldn't ride on it and push each other?
A sure way to lessen the life.
Thank you. I appreciate this presentation, and I really love the design. I think it started out good when you picked up the ball and started carrying it, and I think the suggestions you've made enhance what we had envisioned to begin with. My question really is to Susie, and that's regarding the funding. I mean, this is great. I think we've got all of our ducks in a row, except that one of the ducks may not be there. And with the program open space money, I just wonder if you could give us a probability on what you think as far as that's going to be there, and if we have any suggested backup plan.
I feel 95% sure that the program open space money is available. I think that we've had the request in a long time. It's gone through numerous reviews. I think that we have good politicians on our side if it came to some struggle about the use of funding for interior spaces as legitimate spaces. I've got calls in. I keep checking, but I haven't heard that we are in trouble for that. As a backup plan, I don't have a backup plan. And I think, and as a person who has to process all the paperwork, I'm always worried till every T is done and then,
Sure.
I get the confirmation letter. But I do feel pretty comfortable about this funding source.
Yeah, the worry to me is that is such a significant portion of the project itself, approaching 50%.
Right, and I think that one of the things also that's been important is that Program Open Space has done quite a lot of funding for interior rooms of this building, and so it's a continuation of those past efforts, which I think is an important aspect of our persuasive ability.
Yeah. Thank you.
Will we know, just to follow up on Terry's questions, will we know whether it's yes to open space before we're not sticking a shovel in the ground, before we actually start construction?
I hope so.
Well,
I can't tell you for sure, because there's a couple different points. We can get some pretty good assurance, as we have in the past, from program open space staff. Until the bond bill funds and the program open space funds get the final sign off from the Board of Public Works, we don't know. And so there's always a certain amount of uncertainty with the Board of Public Works. It's normally a consent agenda kind of process. Certainly the controller knows about this room and about this facility, and I think would be persuasive. But sometimes their scheduling for their meetings gets delayed, and so I cannot guarantee that we would know that on both of those aspects with the Board of Public Works. But I think city manager is aware that I am anxious about this, and so I call frequently to make sure that, if there were any hints that there were a problem, I would be able to know right away.
Well, I think it's also in the council's control as far as whether we expend the money before we have it,
right.
or whether we use a more cautious approach.
That's true.
And I don't think
for the funding
you're
as
asking
well.
us tonight for something that would take us beyond that money.
Right.
Yeah, I might just add, Suzanne and I were obviously talking about this issue earlier today. We knew the council would be concerned about it. She and I agreed it would probably be beneficial for her to give Peter Francho a call. Those council members who were able to attend the meeting with the governor's staff may also recall that we had raised this issue. I did follow up with Josh Russin either last week or the week before, gave him a fairly detailed explanation of what the issue was, and expressed our concern that this issue somehow get resolved internally within the state government before we would move forward. So I've not heard back from Mr. Russin, but I will follow up with him to see if he's had any discussions with the applicable state staff.
And my thought was, as the session starts and I and others are spending more time in Annapolis, we'll have the opportunity to make sure that others are equally aware of the level of concern.
One of the things that I do think is important as we talk to our officials is that the handicap accessibility to the dais to the stage is very important, and it is a problem with this facility now, and it cannot be easily addressed without structural changes. So I think that besides the efforts to make this more of a community use facility and all the things that are the important reasons that this has been recommended, from a fairness position, it's also very important to allow that accessibility.
I think it's important for the public to know, especially people who are just hearing this issue for the first time tonight, that the decisions we're making tonight are not in any way suggesting we would be spending money we don't have at this point. We're continuing the planning process. If we answer affirmatively to these questions, we're continuing the planning process to prepare for the work in this auditorium, and it will be at a later date that we actually decide to contract to do the construction, at which time hopefully we will have the answer to this question before then. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my point. So I feel comfortable signing a contract without having assurances from the state about the bond bill money and the open space money.
I feel like I feel comfortable with the level of confidence on the bond bill money. I think that this essentially comes down to the POS funding. If I can just make one or two comments or questions about what we had that we were talking about, and then we can get into the question about the lead money, because we're already well into this item, and I don't want to go too long on this. You were talking a little bit about the lighting and the kind of the trade-off of the high efficiency with the LEDs, but the cost. My sense was that the longer we go with LEDs, the more the cost is coming down. Has that generally been the case, or are they still, I don't know, 4 or 5 times what some of the other technologies are?
Oh, sure. They're still substantially more than traditional or conventional lighting.
by 4 or 5 times. You know, in the space of design here, I mean, it's a couple of months, so we're not going to see a substantial drop in the cost.
Yeah, I didn't know if they'd come down, say, in the last year or so.
Boy, not much. Haven't seen that happen.
Okay.
But then I also haven't been tracking the cost of LEDs, like, for example, Nathan at Cultural Development Corporation has.
That falls to a member of my staff's expertise
Technical
that sadly I do not have. But I'm happy to check in with him.
Just because I know how efficient they are.
They are.
And you really got to bite the bullet up front, too.
Yeah.
Correct.
And wondering what the length of time is to get the return to really make it pay for itself.
The payback.
That is our plan to demonstrate the options to the staff before we're not at an equipment picking stage right now.
Okay.
We're simply conceptual. So those are 2 concepts we'll explore, and then we'll present that cost-benefit analysis to the staff.
And I just want to comment briefly on the dealing with the whole issue of the main entrance and the back entrance. I really like the solution that you've come up with. In many ways, the schematic that I liked the most was the view of this main entrance out here. It's like, wow, it really changed it, and it makes it into something rather than everybody who comes in saying, I'm going to the council meeting or the performance or whatever it is, where do I go? And you point over there through the doors and they go, oh. And at least it will become much more obvious what you're doing. And I like the treatment of the back entrance because the previous concept kind of took away that whole corner as a place where things can happen. As more and more things happen and artwork is hanging, you need places for displays of other things, and that whole corner is good for that. And to lose that to something was too bad. So I like this solution to it. And if nobody has any further questions, I think what we mainly need to deal with is the question of whether we want to pursue LEED certification. And I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what that extra, 75? My sense was that we wanted to do the commissioning. I'll speak for myself. I won't say we. I think the commissioning makes sense of the equipment, and wondering about the other pieces of it, the sense that I had, and this may be a little overly simplistic, but it was that we'll get essentially the same project whether we do the LEED certification or not, because a lot of the upfront work, and that there may be some tweaking in that process, but that the additional money would pay for the process of the certification through the whole thing, and that we would be paying a big chunk of money for essentially PR and a plaque on the wall.
I think we're talking about degrees here. I think the commissioning money is probably is definitely money well spent. That's an easy one. I would say, though, that going for LEED certification is more than just getting a plaque to hang on the wall. I've often spoken around the country and other organizations about LEED and going green in general.
And I say that liking the concept and thinking going into it that I would always want to do that.
Yeah.
But
well, I would start by saying that I think we know where, in general, where the city and the council's heart would lie. We also know the realities of having budget and schedule constraints. That having been said, it seemed like a good opportunity that we thought we would at least present to the council, that going green and going for the certification that tells everyone that, that the city of Tacoma Park is sort of putting its money where its mouth is, makes a lot of sense. We also like the fact that the process of going through the certification adds, again, a level of coordination that honestly does get you a greener project. So it's not just the plaque that's going on the wall. So Chris and I are architects that are well versed in green architecture. We're already going to be designing green. But what's nice is that things that that we would do sort of as a matter of course, that are maybe instinctual or maybe not checked in great detail, because the standard practice is not to go through this level of documentation, testing, certification. But we're doing things sort of
there are a lot of rules of thumb that we would follow, whereas when you go through the certification process, you're required to go through a level of documentation that takes it to a greater level of detail and requires you to change those, to change things to meet those requirements. And I think, did you have an example?
Yeah, I have one example I can give. Is we tend to prioritize on like energy and indoor environmental quality and things like that that are sort of more tangible, more tactile things. But there are a lot of other things that have really strong environmental value, and there are a number of credits that focus on locally sourced materials and locally sourced raw materials, and that's something that we're obviously interested in and we'd love to do, but we wouldn't necessarily do if you weren't trying to get the credit. And there's a second degree environmental benefit that's not immediately felt inside the building that's valuable, and that.
But in that example, could you not pursue LEED certification, but say we want all the materials to come, or 80% of them to come within 500 miles, or whatever those kinds of standards are, and put that in what you put out for the bid, and by doing that, are you building in the cost and therefore kind of setting yourself up to say, well, you might as well get the certification, you've built the cost into your bid process?
Right. I guess one thing is
kind of putting the onus on the contractor, whereas there's a certain amount of research that's required by the A&E team, the architect and engineers. So instead of saying to the contractor, hey, we want you to do it, we're going to do our job and actually research and find those various items, and then tell them, here's where you can get that, go and get that.
And how many of those would be the type of thing that, I guess, how generic is this, or the pieces that would be needed for this project? How much extra time and money would go into finding that level of things, as opposed to, oh, well, we've done other projects like this, we know that these things come from such and such, we don't have to do it for this one. I'm looking for the trade-off of kind of how much that extra money gets, what it really gets us in terms of the incremental greener project, and how much is it worth?
There's a point at which, I don't know if eyeballing is the right term, but we can specify green materials, but then and that's the design side, but then there's a documentation side, which is really the bulk of the extra time and effort that the U.S. Green Building Council requires us to go through.
That was my sense.
Yeah, we can say, we've chosen green materials, we're specifying green materials, and that sounds terrific. But to actually, and this is where, a certification, a metric is really critical, is that people all around the globe, all around the country are saying, I'm doing green, I'm going as green as I can. But, these things can start to erode and be changed during construction, and even in design as we eyeball things, but to actually go through and say, you know what, we're going to go through the extra effort to make sure that we are actually meeting those.
I just thought of a way of asking my question that hopefully will get at what I'm trying to, and the question is going to sound a little harsh, but not toward you, but just in trying to come up with something that makes it so that we don't have 5 minutes more of this conversation.
Sure.
How much of the benefit of doing the LEED certification would be toward a greener project that would have long-term benefit upfront benefit in terms of how green it is going in, and how much it is long-term, and how much would be essentially bean counters certifying that it's that? How much is the real benefit, and how much is that extra overhead cost of doing all that?
Yeah, sure.
I want to, as part of the answer to that question, there are two sort of specific values, I think, to an entity like Tacoma Park. One of them is because you have a large number of projects, you can gain some institutional knowledge by documenting what you've done, and that's a big part of what LEED is about. Is it's we specify all the time. We'll specify those low VOC or zero VOC finishes and things like that, but you don't know how much of it you've done as a ratio of the whole project, and you don't know how, like, You know, you will never know how much recycled content is in the building or something like that. And it becomes useful over time. It becomes useful as you're doing other projects. The other thing is that as this is becoming mandated, you know, especially for public buildings and things like that, we sort of felt like this was a good sort of small contained project that would be a good opportunity for staff to get up to speed on the process and get ahead of that curve and not get
Your
confronted
staff,
by
our staff?
your staff.
Yours.
Yeah, your staff. Because you guys are going to be, again, thinking long-term on this, you
doing
guys
more
are
of
going to
these.
be confronted with this again and again and again. And this is sort of a nice, sort of, like I said, sort of small contained project that that you can sort of get your head around and would give you the ability to get through the process without being overwhelmed by all the parts of the larger building project.
And I guess, and I'm not sure it's really up to you to answer this question, it's more for us to answer the question of how worthwhile it is to do this small little self-contained project within this much bigger project that we've already done that doesn't have the certification, and saying, you know, we're proud of our LEED certification, but only for this room.
Well, it's a point in time at which you say, hey, that was the past and this is the way we're moving forward. And the value is, again, health to the people that actually use the room, because you are getting a healthier space. But there's also a great value in the example that it sets, again, for further development projects in the city and to the folks who are using the space.
Yeah, because I'm just trying to figure out justifying the extra cost, especially in today's fiscal climate, and hearing the kind of news that we heard from the city manager at the beginning that, you know, 75,000 here, 75,000 there, pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Sure.
And the fact that it's what we've been told would fund an environmental person full-time for a year for that incremental cost for this space. So I've had my piece on that with who else? Councilmember Robinson.
I went through something just like this just a couple of years ago, finished about a year ago, and not this scale of this exact thing, but I remember the architect specifying a certain amount of things and us having discussions about LEED certification and other environmentally helpful decisions, and then, as you intimated, during construction time, some things were changed out.
It's amazing how they get rolled back during construction.
Yeah, and there were cost considerations there. So my question is, to what extent is there an increased cost when you guys go through a LEED certification and specify environmentally accurately specify environmentally progressive elements? Does that add, are you going to come back to us and say, we spent the 70, we got the LEED down straight, but it's going to be another couple hundred for the stuff that really is green? Or are you working that into your, have you worked that into your budget already?
Well, we presented you two numbers. We have a fixed number, which we're saying is our number to go through the process, the A&E team on the documentation side, and an estimate for what we believe the increased cost is for construction. And that includes the cost of I guess, increased efficient systems on the mechanical side, and then the cost of tracking those systems, the energy modeling that the engineer does, and the additional cost of green materials that we know will come up in order to meet certain thresholds. So, you know, faced with the choice between two materials, one is green and maybe it costs a little bit more, we know we're going to have to add in a little bit more to meet certain thresholds to get you the points to get you the certification. And so the estimate on construction cost is taking into account the added cost of trying to meet those thresholds.
And that's the page.
It's the second page of that memo.
Right, second page, schedule implications and cost implications on the bottom half of the page. Design phase we've broken down into engineering services and architecture services. And then construction phase, we have an estimate for mechanical systems upgrade to meet the requirements, and then construction, which is everything out in addition to mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So that's more on the design side.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, that's more on the architecture side.
So the 35 is for the design phase, for engineering and architectural, and the 45 is for the construction phase. Those are additional costs for going
Correct.
to
And
the
the
lead.
construction is an estimate, because we're not the contractors. And the A&E fees are fixed. It's what-
And-
we
and
know
the-
what we're going to
And the commissioning portion is part of that total figure.
Half and half. Half of it's in the design and half of it's in the construction.
Okay.
The only other thing I would say, I guess, in terms of the costs involved is, I would guarantee that you'll see it pay dividends in energy cost savings, and then in the the stuff you can't necessarily track, which is, what it does within the community in terms of people's health, but then also the example that it sets. We typically see that. What's really great is,
I missed the very beginning of what you said. You said
We'll pay back over
Hey,
time.
it pays back.
It does
It'll
pay.
pay dividends.
And some of them are hard costs and some of them are...
Some of them are hard costs, some of them are soft costs. Some of them are soft costs that have actually been tracked by organizations such as the Rocky Mountain Institute, who tracks performance and sick days off in conventional spaces versus green spaces. And they find that, in spaces that are healthier for you, people are more productive, they're happier, and you see a reduction in sort of healthcare costs and an increase in productivity. So, healthier council member.
Yeah, we're only in here a couple hours a week.
If we are able to improve the usability of this space, then we'll get revenue from people using it.
If we have a policy that gets us revenue.
Well,
which we don't currently have.
We don't currently have, that's true.
That is a good point. It becomes a signifier for value-added product, on the very practical side of things.
That's what I'm saying.
Just a couple points. First of all, this is Tacoma Park, Maryland, and I should hope that we are erring on the side of being environmentally progressive in our work. I think it's great that we talk about, fiscal responsibility, but I think there's enough work been done in looking at the benefits of the LEED certification that we don't have to spend a whole lot of time deciding whether it is beneficial or not. And then I would also say that if we're worried about the current economic situation, I think we should be looking at the whole project and not just the LEED certification. Although I think the way that we are talking about paying for this is money that couldn't be used for something else at this point in time. That may be overstated the way I said that.
The funds for this, most of the funds for this are really only for this project at this point. The bond bill funds are pretty flexible with the community center. It doesn't have to be auditorium. The federal funds are fairly specific for this facility, and even more specifically for the HVAC and the electrical systems, lighting systems. The Washington Adventist Hospital money is something that you can discuss with them. But the program open space funds certainly could not be used anywhere else within this building. They can be used for park projects elsewhere in Tacoma Park.
All right, then I take back what I said. This is money that if we did not spend it on this project, we could spend it on other projects within the city that would maybe,
to some extent.
To some extent, and it might have an effect of lessening the load on taxpayers.
Yes, the other factor, of course, is that a delay in spending the money may lead to it be taken away.
Okay, thank you.
So, if I could just characterize it as a mixed bag.
But I think it highlights the importance of the discussion on our being fiscally responsible in these difficult economic times, not because we don't have the money, but we are potentially impacting the burden on the taxpayers.
Any other comments? Councilmember Wright.
A couple of things. So one, I just want to be very clear on the LEED issue. So it's about $70,000 to do LEED beyond doing the commissioning. And does that $70,000 get paid back in hard cost savings in terms of energy efficiency, doing LEED versus doing commissioning? So it's sort of like, over 5 years, are we going to save $70,000, or over 10 years, are we going to save $70,000 of doing LEED versus just doing the commissioning?
Well, I'll answer that somewhat generally. Not being an engineer, I haven't calculated the return on investment specifically for the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. But typically, you do see a payback, and you all own this building for a long time here. You're not a temporary tenant.
And then the second question is, are there real, based on that, it sounds like yes, there are real reductions in things like greenhouse gas emissions and
absolutely
energy use of actually doing the LEED versus doing just the commissioning.
That's correct.
Okay. And then if we decide, yes, we want to do LEED tonight, that would get wrapped into the 50% and 100% construction estimates, right? So we would have a better sense and less chance of having surprises that Councilmember Robinson, I think, wisely brought up might exist if we incorporate that into the 50 and 100% construction estimates.
Absolutely, and that is another benefit of going through the LEED process, is the additional coordination required leads to a tighter set of documents and fewer change orders in the field. And, so that, in combination with the added cost estimate, I think are two strategies that help you get better process and increase your chances of staying on time and on budget.
And then the last question is just, you've suggested LEED certified, which is sort of the lowest level of LEED. And would it even be possible to do silver, which is what the county, I think, is suggesting for all new buildings going forward? Or is that something that, based on kind of just the limited scope of the project, it's something that is kind of almost outside the realm of possibility?
It's a little bit of an unusual space. And LEED is actually it's a family of rating systems. So they have LEED for like new construction and LEED for all sorts of different building types, and there isn't a LEED for city council chambers just yet. And so what we've done is we've spoken with U.S. Green Building Council to figure out which is the right starting point, which is the right system to work with, and LEED for commercial interiors is the closest fit. But what that means is there are a number of credits that we just can't get. We can't get credits for special leasing arrangements or things like that. And so our sort of starting pool of credits, I think it's maybe 20% that we can't go after. And so that starts our starting point just is a little bit lower. I think silver would be possible, but I think it gets more expensive in that type of scenario.
May I clarify something? Rick, can you go through, if we would do the LEED certification and the estimating, what kind of a schedule change are we talking about?
Well, we had estimated separately that each one of those items would impact the schedule by 3 weeks during design, but that there would be minimal or no impact to the schedule during construction. Combined, we were basically looking at a 4 to 5 week, and that there would be a certain amount of overlap. I think it would really just be on us to make sure that we could minimize.
That's a combination of if we do LEED certified and the 50 and 100%.
And the 100% and waiting. You already have the 100% in your contract. It's a matter of how it gets scheduled. Waiting to get it back before we go out to bid.
So that there's some overlap in there. If we did just the 50 and 100%, waiting is 3 weeks. If we did both that and LEED, your sense is more 4 to 5 weeks.
Yes, we'll use every day of it, and we'll be basically working very hard to make sure we can stay on track on time for you.
Other questions? So it's up to us. Do we want to do LEED? I think I see an overwhelming majority of yes nods, and I'll include my yes nod in that. I came here expecting no. I've become convinced because I felt like I could more easily defend getting essentially a very green project without the plaque on the wall versus the extra expenditure. I've become convinced that the long-term, best, most fiscally responsible thing to do is to LEED. So if I sounded like my questions were tough, it was because I was in the process of changing my mind.
And I'm assuming that there's no concern about taking the extra time on the estimating.
I don't think so. I think it makes sense to do the 100%, waiting for the 100% on the estimating, to do the commissioning, to do the LEED certification, and to expand the time frame.
So we'll
Do I
come
hear
back with the
any
revised
dissent
schedule
on that?
for people.
Anything that reduces the surprises.
Yes, since we have a lot of experience with change orders.
Unpleasant experience.
Yes. That kept rolling in years after the construction was finished.
Are they resolved yet?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll take a very brief break and come back for our last items.
I figured you would.
code revising stormwater permit fee for multifamily, commercial, industrial, and institutional development. It's the second reading. We have a slight change since our first reading before we took a long break. And if the Public Works Director can just quickly explain what the difference is, we'll get any council comments and public comments and vote on that and get to the main things that we need to.
Primarily, the difference comes about as we kind of stepped back and took a look at what we were working on. Originally, when this came to you, our main motivation and drive was that we were keenly aware that the fee structure we had newly established for commercial, industrial, and institutional buildings was not in line with surrounding jurisdictions. So our focus was really on how to make that work. And we went a couple of different directions. First, taking a look at putting a minimum and maximum to it, and then ultimately deciding that the best way to keep it in line with surrounding jurisdictions was to use the same format, which basically is a percentage cost of the stormwater facility itself as the permit fee, the 10% cost. We also were trying to come up with a way to encourage not only meeting the minimum code, but exceeding those code requirements for those projects that had the ability and the interest on the part of the contractor to do those things, or the project owner. And so it was from there a pretty simple step to develop an incentive program which said you could get up to 50% of your permit fee returned to you if you exceeded the code requirements of the city, which is based on the state design manual for stormwater structures. Once I came back and took a look at this in preparation for second reading and finalizing this, it sort of dawned on me that that same rebate or refund of the 50% fee, there was no reason why it couldn't also apply to single-family and multifamily structures. And again, our focus had been on commercial, industrial, and institutional. We hadn't changed anything else in the code. We were just really focused on that correction to that section of the development community. So once I stepped back and took a look at it and discussed it with the city engineer, what it means to the ordinance itself is we basically just took the sentence out of number 3 and moved it to number 4 and made it apply to everybody. Now that said, I think it will be very rare where a single family or a multifamily project will be able to exceed the code requirements. Again, they're dealing with fairly smaller and constrained sites, especially in our city. They're very few and far between. I think the city engineer has dealt with 4 single-family stormwater permits in the 3 years that he's been here, so they don't come up very often. Usually they don't, single-family developments in Tacoma Park don't meet the 5,000 square foot of disturbance threshold. So they're limited, and their occurrence will be minimal. But again, there was no reason on our part to restrict that ability to exceed the code and to get recognized for that from the fee structure. So we just thought it was a better overall policy to make that available to any applicant.
And you're sure that the change in the language does that?
Yes.
I'll believe you.
Well, part of it, again, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. We need to develop administrative regulations that make it clear to all applicants what we'll be judging, how we'll be judging. That is going to be a very difficult and challenging document to develop. The city engineer has begun working on that. And again, his focus has been commercial because we receive more of those applications in the stormwater realm than we do in other developments. But we'll make sure it applies to any applicant. And we really will be going step by step through the design manual that we've adopted as part of the state's process for this. And so that'll lay out the criteria by which, if it says this and you do twice this, then you're entitled to a
Council have any
recognition.
questions? Councilmember Snipper.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of commas.
Okay.
So when I see section E3, it's the last page, the sentence begins, commercial, industrial, and institutional development and multi-family dwellings. Where do the, if you were going to put in another comma, where would it go? I'm not sure how to read that, in other words. Is commercial modifying development or multifamily?
No,
dwelling?
there are
What is
three
it?
different types of development: commercial, industrial, or institutional.
Okay. So those are the three kinds of development. Okay. So I'd really urge you to stick a comma in there.
Between industrial and
Yeah, because then you know there's three of them. But it's
That makes it confusing, doesn't it, with the next and?
No, because I think then you know where the noun is. It's development. So then.
We would make that same change under the review fee. We have the same categories
Yeah, I know.
in Section A,
Right.
1, 2, and 3. So we could make that grammatical correction in both areas.
If it makes them happy, we'll do it.
Yep.
Other questions? Councilmember Robinson.
Very briefly, thank you, Daryl, for bringing this back and working on it so diligently to get it the way it makes the most sense. And I know that this went back and forth with us even 3 times, 4 times, something like that. So thank you. It looks like a good document to me.
Would somebody like to move this?
Move the ordinance.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Clay, seconded by you take your pick. Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you. I just one question.
Mr. Recently elected council member, you take your pick.
Yes.
Daryl, I don't know that it's related or not. There's a condominium in Ward 4 that the owners would like to develop a rainscaping project and have the stormwater fees to help pay for that. And I wonder if that's a possibility.
Well, I'm glad you raised that because it does relate to comments that were made by the Friends of Sligo Creek through Robert Hu at first reading, and I hadn't had an opportunity to comment on those, so I had wanted to take time, if there was time, to comment on that. One of the things that my office has been fairly consistent about is that we're totally in support of the type of rainscapes program that Montgomery County has developed, and we have met with them to try to find out where and how and if it could be extended to Tacoma Park. It's quite clear that it's a matter of money, and we could use some of the program parameters that the county has already spent considerable amount of time and energy developing for application process, type of projects, those kinds of things. They've got their procedure for application review and site development and then rebate fairly well laid out, and a lot of the legwork has been done for us by them. It's our opinion that the current state of what we need to manage of the city's stormwater infrastructure on an annual basis uses every bit of the funds that the stormwater fee system that we have generates. That $350,000 a year is really just enough to keep us keeping on top of the repairs, keeping on top of the new projects, and making sure that our system gets cleaned and inspected on a 3-year cycle. So in order to develop a rainscapes program for the city, we need a funding source, and our recommendation is not to tap into the existing stormwater fee structure that currently funds the stormwater program, because it's pretty much allocated. If you defer some of that money off and funnel it into a rainscapes type program, you're going to extend the time and the ability we have to respond to our infrastructure system that is in place now. And I would fully assume that we would be talking about this come budget time as to what we might do to develop a program, what it might cost, and where to start. I mean, there's some pieces of it that are more easily pulled away. Tree planting incentives, for instance. We have an existing tree fund that's set up in the city budget that people pay into when they decide not to replace a tree on their own property, but to pay into a tree fund. Up to this point, that money has been used specifically for planting trees in the right-of-way. It's a policy decision on the part of the council. The council would like to make those funds available to reimbursing or rebating people for a portion of what they've spent to plant a tree in their private property. We could set that program in motion. Each year, our budget is about $10,000 for tree planting, and we generate equally another $10,000 within the tree budget just from those permit fees and tree permit replacements. So that fund is fairly well established. though I don't think you'll hear our arborist say we should slow down on our tree planting, but I think in his mind, a tree planted in a front yard versus a tree planted in the city right-of-way, as long as we can encourage people to plant overstory trees and the variety of species that we think works in that area, we're fine if it's 20 feet back from the curb line. So that is one piece of our Rainscapes program that would be more easily implemented in the city. One of the other issues that we have with the Rainscapes program, and what the county was quite clear about, is it takes a lot of staff time. Basically, when you receive an application, you have to go to the site. You've got to talk and meet with the folks that are developing the program. Some are more simple than others. If you're going to put a rain barrel up, that's not too complicated a process. But again, whether or not we want our program to include rain barrels, there's been a lot of back and forth as to whether rain barrels ultimately get you any further along or are better able to handle stormwater flow or rainwater flow. So there's those kind of decisions that we need to make, and it would be staff time, which currently the person you have in the office that deals with stormwater issues is also the city engineer that deals with street restoration issues, is also the person who oversees driveway applications, dumpster permits. They're maxed out. That's a one-man show. That's one of the busiest people in city staff. Not to take anything away from anybody else, but it's a chalk to the top daily grind. So again, it's a funding issue. It's how to staff it, how to do the review, how to go through the paperwork, and make sure that when somebody says they're going to install a green roof, and we come out and make sure they yes indeed install the green roof and they're eligible for the funding. We do hear from residents. I know people are interested in that kind of rebate program. Whether or not $1,000 or $2,000 would be the turning point by which more people would do it than would otherwise, I guess we need to just start exploring that and see if that's really going to get us further along the track towards green, low-impact development all around the city.
Does the county, fund their Rainscapes program totally through stormwater management dollars, or including the staff time used to inspect people's properties?
They also get grants. I think grant funds both from the Chesapeake Bay Trust as well as from National Wildlife has been a substantial portion of the money that they use to develop the infrastructure for the program in terms of applications, techniques, engineering studies that kind of give them the background for what they say should be included in any particular project.
But they're not used for staff time in particular. Are they using?
I don't know. I know that there's one staff person that reviews applications and is basically in charge of the program, and she does the site visits. There's another person who oversees her and is sometimes involved with the...
I think if they use general funds as opposed to stormwater funds, you could make the case that that should be a countywide function, and they should come and process those applications for us, although we would be happy to pay for the rebate.
Yeah.
That, just might be some more.
Well, I just say that there is a project that's ready to go, and Ward 4 has volunteers lined up, but need to find some way to make it happen. It might be a good model to use to find out what the workload would be and help us to draft a more comprehensive program.
Mm-hmm. Is there anybody else who has any comments that are very germane to what's in front of us?
I just would be curious if there were other aspects to Mr. Gu's letter that you want to respond to.
I think that was the main body of it. I think that in most of Mr. Gu's comments, they like the incentives. They want the stormwater permit program to be self-supporting. All those things exist in our current program. And their main point, I think, was that they want the city to develop a Rainscapes type program. And so my issue is basically identifying that funding and staffing are pretty much the limitations at this point. They had some comments on the language in the they wanted to know about a change in the waiver fee or revision fee. We didn't make any changes to that, so it's existing language. There weren't any alterations. And he had a comment about would like to see the waiver section rewritten. Again, we didn't address that in the ordinance that we developed. The only thing that we focused on was the permit fee structure itself, because originally it was missing, and we developed one. We found out we overpriced ourselves, and this last was to try to get the correction to that. And I think they were also interested in having us develop, either in the language of the ordinance or through another mechanism, explanations for how people would go about applying for that rebate program.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Robinson.
I'll just say that the Mainscapes in our small town seems like it might be a good vehicle for a nonprofit like Friends of Sligo Creek to spearhead and look for their own grants and then spread that wealth of information and funding throughout the populace instead of us taking it on as a staff job.
They do have expertise within Friends of Sligo Creek. Our first rain garden program was actually assisted greatly by Friends of Sligo Creek.
Is there any public comment on this ordinance? Seeing none, it's a second reading. Would the clerk please call the roll? Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. The next item is the consent agenda. We have 3 items on the consent agenda. Resolution amending the employment agreement of the city manager, a resolution providing for appointments to the tree commission and the committee on the environment. So we'd like to move it.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Siemens, second by Councilmember Clay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. We are now on the work session agenda item on discussion of Pinecrest traffic calming.
Good evening, Council. I'm here tonight with Bridget Bowers, who's the president of the Pinecrest Neighborhood Association, which has put forth a plan after much deliberation following a study that the city conducted, and is now ready to request that the city install the plan that has been selected. The plan is composed of a variety of measures that are intended to slow traffic within the Pinecrest neighborhood and adjoining Circlewood streets. The traffic is both cut through and speeding. They've had some of the higher speeds, and also a large volume of cut through traffic, mainly due to the intersection at New Hampshire and Eastern. There were also some safety concerns due to the hills that are very steep in this neighborhood, and very few of the streets have sidewalks.
And many of the streets that do have sidewalks, it was put in with Montgomery County funding after unification.
Right, and some of the sidewalks are surprisingly narrow. I'll leave the description of the sidewalks for that. But the other thing that I would like to bring to your attention is that I did work with Public Works to develop a cost estimate for this project, and the cost estimate would essentially zero out the amount of funding that's available for this year in the current budget. The scope of the work for this neighborhood is similar to the scope of work in terms of what the cost would be. It's probably at the low end of the cost that would be proposed for each of the neighborhoods, depending on what comes forward. The neighborhood that I would expect to come forward next is New Hampshire Gardens, and their costs would likely be similar because they include one raised intersection, as well as it's likely that one of the intersections would have some type of traffic circle.
And a sense of a time frame on when theirs might come forward and how that might coincide with the change in fiscal year to July 1?
I would expect them to come forward this spring. Now that may put them close enough to July 1 that it would not seem that far behind. Given construction schedules and so forth, that may work out well. It may be that you may want to consider allocating more, but I'm not sure. They still need to go through an additional flyering of the neighborhood, and then the neighborhood needs to meet and make a decision, and then it will come forward.
And so that puts them kind of how many months behind Pinecrest's process? Equal point.
Probably 1.5 months behind, and then your decision process may be another 1.5 months. So,
up to 3 months behind.
right.
So you've still got Lime Branch Sligo, so also that's going to resume their traffic calming after WSSC gets done in the neighborhood, which is.
Oh, well, that'll be 5 years.
So, yeah, but, they were kind of the first one out of the gate, and then Flower Avenue and Sligo Creek all got ripped up. On the heels of ripping up Davis and Jackson and the other end of Flower, so, they're essentially on hold right now while they wait for WSC to get done.
Can we use,
That's why we're right.
it hasn't come in yet, but can we use speed camera dollars for this type of?
Yes, actually, by state law, any revenues generated from the speed camera program can be used for infrastructure improvements that improve pedestrian safety, traffic calming measures. In fact, they're legally restricted to those purposes.
Yes, Mayor.
Yes, Member Perry.
I wonder too, although it's not clear to me how we might do this, but if there is a way to prioritize the projects based on some criteria. The criteria might be, of course, the level of need as measured by car counts through the area or police confirmation of particularly dangerous areas. That would be one way, and of course the expertise of our planning department, familiar as you are with the study that has been done and the data collected. There may be a way of saying this should go first because there's a chance it will save lives or prevent traffic accidents, in which case I would be more than happy to discuss with the New Hampshire Gardens Association waiting an appropriate time until A, the money is collected through other as yet unidentified sources, or waiting until the next fiscal year, assuming that the other wards in the city could also be ranked and rated in some way that would not lead us into a free-for-all or a personality contest to see who ought to prevail. I just like to see if there's some standards that we might be able to establish to help us prioritize the money and the projects.
Councilmember Clay.
I think we did that at the beginning of the process when we had the engineers, the staff and the engineers went through a prioritization process, and actually Lime Branch was at the top of the list, and I can't remember if Pinecrest was second or third. But that's how the top 3 got selected the first time from the...
Because there were about 6.
Yeah, there were several, but I know that Long Branch was the first priority.
So, having not seen those in a while, maybe it would be useful to trot them out again and take a look.
I'm not sure. We could certainly look at volumes and the speeds that were taken, but I think that those were mainly taken not to conclusively say this is more than another neighborhood. They were taken more to give a sense of, is this a problem or is this not a problem, but not to conclusively measure one neighborhood against another neighborhood. This neighborhood is at a stage where they are ready to go forward. Another New Hampshire Gardens may come up soon, Long Branch Sligo may come up soon, and as they decide what their selection may be, then we would be able to go out and do a cost estimate on what the cost that would be, or the amount of funding that would be required in order to achieve what the neighborhood has requested. And at that point, it might be appropriate to look at what funding sources there are once there's a definite cost associated with the project. And I don't know, I'm not as I only know the funding sources that come from the budget. I don't know that much about other sources.
And when do we anticipate that the speed cameras are going in? I had the impression that they were very soon, but
The chief plans to send one of his staff, starting to kind of a training offered by the vendor to make sure that we're doing all the implementation. I would expect the speed cameras to be programmed to be implemented sometime later this year.
this calendar year, fiscal year?
Fiscal year. Yeah, I think they'll be up and running, but I do think it will be a little bit later towards the fiscal year. It's anybody's guess, I guess, in terms of what we will get as far as revenue. What we had assumed for budgetary purposes was $55,000. Obviously, I don't think that will happen this fiscal year, but that might give some sense of what we thought might occur on an annual basis.
But we'll have a hole in this year's budget.
Right. We won't have the expense and we won't have the revenue.
Councilmember Robinson.
It's a process question. In the old days, people would just ask for speed bumps, sign a petition, we put them in. But this is a new proactive model that we have now. And I know, Alana, that you tried various approaches in getting consensus in Pinecrest for where to put the speed humps or the raised tables, also to evaluate whether a one-way on Kansas was a good idea or not. I wonder if you have any, if either of you, because you were both involved in this, have any suggestions or opinions on what worked best, or if you're building a kind of a quiver of approaches that we can look forward to seeing in the future.
I think each neighborhood had, do you mean in Pinecrest or throughout the city?
Well, I observed Pinecrest, and I know that you tried several approaches. There were community meetings, there were various kinds of outreach.
Right.
There was a survey that was conducted through Public Works. There were petitions signed. You tried various things. Did that work? Was that the right approach in retrospect, or would you drop some things and concentrate on other things and say, let's clear the decks and use this as our method to determine what consensus in a particular neighborhood to get?
I think each neighborhood has its own particular form of consensus, and in Pinecrest, the method that we used was progressive, so that each time a decision was needed, the neighborhood association decided whether there were enough people at the table to make the decision or whether it needed to be made by the wider community. So that's why there were different, at one point we did put a survey out to people who had not been going to the meeting because the neighborhood association didn't feel comfortable making that decision. Whereas other items, the neighborhood association felt comfortable representing their neighbors on those issues. So I think it just depended on what, in this process, we left it very much up to the neighborhood. We would suggest different things, but we left it up to the association in terms of deciding ultimately if this would bring them to a decision.
Okay, and that, Bridget.
I think Alana's been awesome in helping us with dealing with a very kind of contentious issue on Pinecrest and helping us come up with some specific things that most people are happy with. What I would suggest, though, is creating a more streamlined process, because I think there's a little bit of confusion amongst neighbors. For example, Fourth went around and signed signatures, whereas Kansas, the city actually distributed flyers and created this phone service. So there was a lot of discrepancy, and people ended up feeling frustrated because the system was not clear-cut and clearly defined as, if you want these traffic calming measures, do X, Y, and Z, propose it at the council. And that wasn't through any fault of Alona. I just think it's something that needs to be looked at in the future, because it did leave neighbors frustrated with the process.
And while the process is important, I'd like to get back for a second to the prioritization issue. It could be that we attempt to decide whether a bollard in one place is desirable, and a stop sign in another place, and a traffic circle in a third place. That is, instead of looking at it by neighborhood and allocating all the money to one area, we could also look at it as in terms of dividing the money between the three objectively problem areas in the city, and trying to determine how to divide the money in such a way where it goes to things in each of those places that are most likely to get us the level or measure of traffic safety that we desire. Not that it will do everything we want to do this fiscal year, but at least it can do some things in each of the three wards that would be better than nothing in two and everything in one, and then waiting for the next fiscal year to deal with the other two places. I don't know how to do that, but I guess I would put it back on your shoulders to try to come up with a process for prioritizing things in case we wanted to go to the model where we would find things in each ward that were important to do now and that we could afford with the $48,000 available.
May I say something? Or am I not allowed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody's allowed.
Please stop you.
I think with all due respect, Councilmember Berry, I think it would have been better to communicate that up front to the neighborhood associations. I think there's been certain expectations set within neighborhood associations as to kind of the process and how the money is going to be allocated. So I think to kind of take a step back and say, well, the process is going to go a little bit differently is going to create more frustration within the neighborhoods, but that's just me.
Councilmember Klein.
So do I understand it then that there's $50,000 allocated and nothing has been spent on anything else? So we would in fact be spending everything in one neighborhood?
This fiscal year, $50,000 was allocated.
Right, okay. Thank you. And then I think that, I mean, definitely Long Branch echoed some of the things that you talked about. Like there was a lack of frustration about the clarity of the process, and it was really exciting for me to go and tell the folks that, in fact, the process as it was outlined to me was that, we have a speed bump process, but the process that we used, which worked actually really well in the Saska neighborhood where we did the traffic circle and the reduced T intersection along Elm, was that the neighbors came to a consensus. But when there wasn't a clear consensus in Long Branch Sligo, you had frustration. People who wanted to vote, in some cases, people felt like they were pitted against other neighbors, and there was actually some hostility from people towards their neighbors, which was really unfortunate. And other people left kind of abandoned. Other people felt like they'd been abandoned by their community, and in the end, there wasn't a procedural, solution to resolve that was really frustrating. However, I think one thing that I was clear with people about was that we would move forward. Their council member would come forward as their advocate to make recommendations, but in the end, it would be the city council who would determine sort of what would happen, and so they would work up some best scenarios with some ideas about, what were priorities, but it didn't mean that they would come with a priority list of 10 things and necessarily that the council would fund them all.
Oh, I totally agree.
The flip side of that, though, is that it would be nice to be able to do systematic traffic calming in our neighborhoods, because I was the person who I think most strongly advocated for this and wanted to see this happen and get this going, in part because the piecemeal approach to traffic calming hasn't been very effective, and I think, in fact, Ward 3 is probably one of the best examples. The first city council meeting that I came to was about putting the speed bumps on Hickory, and it was the first public comment that I made is that, I don't like speed bumps. I think they're hard on your vehicles, and I think there are better systematic ways to do that, but what had happened is that every other street had got speed bumps, and so Hickory was left as the throughway, and they were the last ones to get speed bumps. And so at the end of that, it turned around and distributed all the traffic back out evenly, because no matter what street you went, you got a speed bump, so there's no advantage speed-wise going down one street. And so you have this approach where one by one, people add speed bumps, and then what you have is a neighborhood that's been hardened, essentially they call it hard architecture, but it's a hard streetscape that's been hardened against the traffic and makes it, it's equally unpleasant for everybody at that point. And so the idea was that you would have this more systematic approach where you could use things, hopefully other than speed bumps, to be able to change the way that traffic moves. So that's kind of the other side of the argument. It'd be good if we could come up with a solution that preserves that as well. Now, I also understand that the city has looked at actually putting in place a firmer process that's related to the more neighborhood-based traffic calming that we didn't have before. It's not out yet, and I'm sure we won't get to it till after the budget, but I look forward to that coming onto the council agenda next fall, probably.
Councilmember Wright?
Councilmember Clay made my point where to get rid of it. Although I agree with Councilmember Berry that we have to be careful not to just fund one neighborhood. Traffic does sort of flow like water, so if you do some of them and not others, then some members may get some, for the short term, some residents may get severely disadvantaged because their street may become the easy pipe for traffic to flow through. And then the other is that for Bridget to tell you a set of very complex compromises that have been made, and things could fall apart, we could get very upset if they've agreed to have this thing here if something else goes there, but if you decide you're only going to fund this thing over there, then someone feels like they've been shortchanged in the process.
Yeah, and I would say I agree that it's been a good thing to move away from the kind of the singular approach and more toward the neighborhood-based approach, because that really was the case, that it was just, put them on, some people are concerned you put them on one street or two streets, and then a year or two later you've got the next people coming in with the same kind of thing. So I think this more comprehensive approach is a better way to do it, and I would hate to start breaking this comprehensive approach apart and saying, well, now, prioritize your top 4 items or whatever it is, and then it kind of reopens the whole neighborhood process up again. And I have some experience with I have some experience with Pinecrest, and I know how difficult it can be to come up with a consensus approach and being ready for some action. And so I appreciate the difficulty that might be involved in trying to go back and parse that. So I would be in support of funding what we have in front of us and dealing with the other pieces. We know that we've had 3 priority funding neighborhoods for this, and it sounds like the other ones are a couple of months behind. And the construction on this, and we still have process to go through with this. This is just the work session. We've still got something coming forward, 2 readings, getting into the spring construction time when the asphalt plants open up again, and as the other neighborhoods come in, I think we'll be in a position both with budgetary monies and with the speed camera monies coming on board soon in terms of the process of these other ones coming forward, that I think if we just do this one and do the other 2 when we get to them, we will have the funding in place with things that we know about now. Councilmember Siemens.
A couple little quick things. I just wanted to remind the mayor that the Ritchie Avenue neighborhood does have a petition for an additional speed bump in the pipeline, and so that should be coming in again soon. But I do like this this traffic study or traffic calming proposal, because it does include more than just speed bumps, and it looks for a broader range of solutions. I wonder, though, if we have done any monitoring before, and we plan to do any monitoring after to see what the effect of the changes would be, rather than just being anecdotal.
At the moment, we don't have any budgeting for project monitoring.
But there was pre-project monitoring.
And was that done by neighborhood volunteers, or was that done by a contractor?
It was done by a contractor.
Because I know in the past we've had neighborhood volunteers doing traffic studies, traffic counts. We couldn't
And we did
encourage that.
have neighborhood volunteers in Long Branch, Sligo that did do a significant amount of traffic monitoring during testing of various options.
I think having the post-implementation monitoring would be helpful to your office, and if you look at possible solutions for other neighborhoods in the future.
Do we have consensus to go forward with the agenda items, bringing this forward for 2 readings?
Yes.
Okay. So we're good on that item. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Sure.
I was wondering if the city does any analysis of the effect of speed bumps and stop signs and other calming stuff on air emissions?
On?
Air emissions, particulates and ozone precursors and benzene, toluene, et al., components of gasoline.
I think the simple answer is no.
The city might want to consider it since cars and trucks emit the most right when they're starting up from a stop or a speed bump where they've almost stopped.
There is actually data available on that, and she's right. It increases the amount of gas that they expend, and it also increases the amount of brake dust. You can find it on
Thanks, I forgot that part.
Yeah, isn't that exciting? It's I think it's ITE.org. It's like International Traffic Engineers or something like that.
Would somebody like to propose we rip all the speed bumps out?
I think I proposed that when I first got elected, and no one else supported it. So. I think it's ITE.org. It's like International. Alana, do you know?
Institute of Traffic Engineers.
There you go.
Thank you. Now we'll move to our last item, which is proposed amendments to the charter and the code related to election issues. And we have the chair of the
Board of Elections.
Board of Elections, thank you.
And there were cups here a little while ago. Are there any more cups? Oh, thank you.
Sorry for the late hour.
I was here. I figured I might as well stay. Okay, good evening, everybody. Hi. I'm here to quickly review, and I will be quick, I promise, what the Board of Elections has been up to. We're making, in the process of developing amendments to the charter and the code, because they're connected to each other. I'll try to summarize really quickly. We want to allow for no-fault absentee balloting, which means that you don't need any reason other than you want to use an absentee ballot to be able to use an absentee ballot. We want to add provisional voting, which really quickly is vote now, sort it out later. If there's a challenge to somebody's identity, if they believe that they're registered but they don't show up in the rolls, a whole mess of other reasons. They vote on a special form, and then there are criteria for sorting out whether their vote is valid or not the next day. Well, here it would be the next day. And that has a whole new section in the code to allow for provisional voting. And I think that's going to have to map back to the charter as well, but we'll work that stuff out later. The Board of Elections has been through most of the changes, but not all of them. We tried to finish up at our last meeting, and we didn't quite get there. So I'm hoping we'll finish tomorrow here in a different room. We also
took every opportunity we could to make the code and the charter more consistent, or as consistent as we could possibly make it with the state of Maryland and therefore Montgomery County regs for voter logistics, eligibility, what it takes to, we're working on cleaning up the voter rolls. The rolls are very large, and compared to we have a lot of people on the voter rolls who have not voted in a long time, and the county has a way of systematically, there are criteria for when someone is purged from the rolls. It's a certain number of times they haven't voted, and also have failed to respond to written transmissions to their household, and also not, haven't voted a certain number of times and haven't responded to things in writing. And then even if you're designated as an inactive voter and you show up to vote, well, then that's when you get to vote provisionally and you get put back on if it all is in order. There was also some differences like 21 days versus 30 days, 21 days to register, I guess that's with the county, but in Tacoma Park you have to have been a resident for 30 days, so why should it be any less than, just some consistency type stuff. I can go into more detail if you want, but it is probably about 10:30. So. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes?
Councilmember Clay.
I'm sorry that I didn't read this all before I came tonight. I've looked at the cover sheet, but
It's a really nice cover sheet, I have to say. Jesse did a great job summarizing. So
that's good. And it probably says in here somewhere, and I'll embarrass myself, but does this apply just to the city election, or does this apply when we vote for president or state office also?
This is just City of Tacoma Park elections.
Thank you.
I have a question about...
Councilmember Rounds.
Oh, thank you. I have a question about Section 610, the advisory referendums.
Okay.
And in number 1 there, letter B,
Okay.
B1, B2, it says 20% or more of the qualified voters may sign a petition to place an advisory referendum question or legislative initiative on the ballot. And I looked into this some years back. We have, let's see if I recollect, the number of people who vote in a typical election here is about 20% of the qualified voters. So what that paragraph kind of implies, almost dictates, is that nearly the same number of people who vote have to sign a petition to put something on the ballot. And that's always seemed to me excessive in the number of signatures required. And I did ask around a bit, and I wish I had the specifics, but I was told that that's not a state-mandated required number. There are certain numbers that we are required to maintain, but that's not one of them. Do you have an opinion on that?
No, we have not looked at this at all.
Okay.
Sorry, this is just not one of the issues that we picked to work on. We could add it to the list.
Yeah. Could you add that to your list?
Sure.
So my question is that a hard number? Does it have to be that 20%, or is there any wiggle room there? And again,
I can't even answer the question. I have no data. I'm sorry.
Any other questions? Councilmember Wright.
I just want to make sure the revised the thing that's, I didn't, also like Councilmember Clay, I haven't read through all the details other than the cover sheet, but I just want to make sure that third bullet point, revise the qualification for voter registration to match the state of Maryland qualification, won't in any way affect our non-citizen voting provision.
That's correct. Non-citizens will still be allowed to vote in Tacoma Park, provided they meet the other qualifications, residency, and so on.
And then, did we look at, to your bullet point number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, clarifying that voter registration for the city election closes 30 days before the election? Have we looked at whether we ever want to do same-day registration?
No, that is not something that we looked at.
Because I think that's in the universal voting world where you're trying to get as many people registered and able to vote as they can. Same-day registration is one of the things that people talk about.
Yes, people do talk about that. Maryland does not do it. And since our aim was to be consistent with Maryland, we didn't explicitly discuss this. Well, maybe we did, actually, since it's on the
There are
list.
lots of places where we're not consistent with Maryland because we believe that Maryland actually doesn't have it right, like instant voter.
Instant runoff voting?
vote.
That's true. We are not consistent with Maryland that way, but we hope they will become consistent with us.
Right, so that's my point, is that I think if we want best practices for our election, one of the nice things is we have the power, just within the city to change those things. So I wonder if we might look at that as well. Just advisory or suggestion to look at. It may be too complicated to implement based on staff, I'm not sure.
I had a question of the city clerk, just in terms of the requirements for changing the charter. I know that we tend to not want to do that too often because there are costs associated with it. Do you have a sense of the last time we did this, and then I want to make sure that we don't have any sense of anything else coming up that we would want to bundle with it and do all at the same time, kind of how this fits into that continuum?
We did it last with IRB, and it'll cost with publishing, legal publishing and legal fees. It's $1,500 to $2,500, something in that range. It's going to cost us. I think the board and I were looking at some specific initiatives for this year to take place in advance of the next election. What the board started out with was the no-fault absentee and the provisional voters and no-turn any vote in the polling place. Some of the other things flowed out of that. The other points that have been raised tonight, I think the board would be happy to look into and pursue, but I don't recommend waiting for those other initiatives to have it done for the next election. If we want to have these charter amendments done in time for the next election, I think
Because the time frames on charter amendments are pretty drawn out.
it takes about 90 days to enact the charter amendment. So my recommendation is to go with what the board is basically recommending at this point in 2 years, a year and a half or 2 years, after the board's been through yet another election, has had more of a chance to review everything, to then look more seriously at these other issues.
And what other, just off the top of your head, what other issues have we taken up in terms of charter amendments outside of the elections area? We had wholesale revisions of the charter and code kind of all bundled together, but then we had other pieces that didn't get done, and I'm just trying to get a sense of where we are in the bigger picture of dealing with any possible charter amendments.
In the big picture, the whole charter was redone in, I think, in 2001, so in that time frame. So the whole charter was redone as part of the recodification project. So the charter is in pretty good shape as a document, whereas the code needs work. The charter is, I'm not aware of things that are pending that need to be changed in the charter outside of elections. There may be, but I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you.
There was one more thing I forgot to mention. Some people have asked about early voting, and essentially having no-fault absentee voting takes care of the early voting idea, because people can say, I want to vote now, and go down. If they want, they can apply in person for an absentee ballot, assuming the ballots are actually ready, but you wouldn't be able to vote any earlier than the ballots were ready anyway. So you could come in any day you wanted to after they were ready and say, I'd like to apply for an absentee ballot, vote right then and there, and you'd be able to vote ahead of the election. Just in case
Potentially something like 3 or 4 weeks ahead of the election.
Something like that, yeah.
And did the clerk have another point to make?
If the council is comfortable with the direction of specifically the charter changes that the board has recommended, I'd like to start that process and to have you actually schedule a public hearing late in February. And I could then publish a notice and we could get the process started if you're comfortable with these charter changes. The code, I think the board will come back to you at a later date with more detail on the code revisions.
And the 3-month process you're talking about
Is for the charter.
would start in late February, or we're well into it in late February?
No, it was, we'd start with the publication, notice of the public hearing, which would be we'd publish notice in mid-February, early February, mid-February, a public hearing on, I'm suggesting February 23rd.
So potentially by early May, the process would be finished.
Right, so, and in the meantime, you could address the code amendments if you're comfortable moving ahead with these charter amendments.
And any other ones that aren't part of this packet, if for some reason somebody were to decide that there really needs to be something else in there, the time frame to do that is pretty small.
In the next couple of weeks.
Okay. Because the Board of Elections meets monthly?
Yes.
And your next meeting is tomorrow night?
Tomorrow.
And so, if there were other things to be considered, they would need to go to the Board of Elections, and unless they accelerated their process or had special meetings, that would be a month from now, and that would be almost too late for the process you're talking about.
It would delay the process.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure we understood that. So, are people happy with the packet of changes proposed to be made?
I'm happy except for that one point I made.
And you'll be happy even if that isn't in there?
No. I want that piece in there. I want you to look at it tomorrow night, and maybe I'll come to the meeting. Is that appropriate?
They're all open to the public. So, yes, is the short answer, so.
We could take a straw vote and see if we thought that really passed or changed.
We could do that.
Or straw vote to get a sense of those who might want to see the percentage for ballot question signatures. Advisory being less than what is currently in there, and having the Board of Elections look at that and potentially have that to be considered part of this packet. Raise your hand.
It's complex.
I know that's why I'm moving.
Oh, so that's the easy way to get Councilmember Siemens' vote, is make it too complex. I see 2 hands up. So I guess
I'm not going to.
I guess
be there on this
the Board of Elections at the moment doesn't need to spend
It's
time
only a
on that
straw-
one.
It's only a straw vote, though. That doesn't mean that, a real proposal coming forward wouldn't be.
I'm not objectionable to changing the percentage. I would not want it to be a percentage of the people who voted in the last election because of the cascade effects of that. I would accept a smaller percentage of the people eligible to vote within the city. Like, I would accept 10%. I may accept 5% if the Board of Elections actually recommended it, but coming from a state that amended its state constitution 450 times before I left the state, I'm not, ballot box crazy, so,
Yeah, and my reluctance is knowing the experience in states like California where you get ballot questions that end up...
Well, you get ballot box budgeting, ballot box zoning.
And you get things that conflict with each other, and what do you do about that?
Yeah.
On the other hand, in Switzerland, they have a very deep and long history of referenda at the local level, and it's pretty effective, and they're quite happy with it. So it's a different model, and I don't think this points us in a direction of becoming just like California. But my point, I'll reiterate that this 20% pretty much equates to the number of votes that we cast. So what we're saying is, right, you you're requiring full voting complement just to put something on the ballot.
Except that it doesn't map exactly. Anybody can sign the petition,
Ah.
but they don't. That doesn't commit them to voting. So you could have this 20%, say this 20% signing the referendum, signing the petition, and
Yes.
then this 20% being the population that actually votes. So there may or may not be any overlap between the people.
So with Councilmember Clay's less complex description of the straw poll, could we see how many people would support that?
Got any other signer-uppers?
Don't see any interest.
Josh, you're not going to support anything?
Well, I think it's not a barrier to moving forward with what we have now, is the issue. It's not that we're not interested in it. I'm just curious. Yeah, I wouldn't hold this up at this point, though.
So we still want the election board to look at this, but what?
Is that okay?
Please tell me some more because I don't know what you want. You think that the number of signatures is too high. The number of signatures required is too high. So I would think that what we would do is look at the number of signatures required for other stuff, like I don't remember at all right now how the nominating process for individual humans works. So maybe it should be comparable to that. We would want to at least look at that. Do we want to be comparable to what, say, Maryland requires? I have no idea how it works there. So we'd want to look at how other people do it to just see where we are in the universe. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I would like that to happen. And Montgomery County.
Having just seen the paper and this amendment passed, I'm not really interested in amending it at all, really, so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I'm not really interested in bothering to have the Board of Elections look at it at all, because I'm not really interested in amending the percentage, so. But if 4 of the 7 want to have them look at it, that's fine by me. But I will be not be bothered.
I agree with Councilmember Wright.
And I was just pointing out to Councilmember Clay that I believe the Maryland court just ruled on the language in the state law. So you might want to look at that ruling too. I think it was specific that you could not base it on the number of voters in the last election. You have to base it on the number of registered voters.
That makes sense to me, especially in Tacoma Park when the turnout varies a lot between elections. Which election would you pick as your set point? So,
Can I try summarizing this past little discussion here that I don't see a majority of folks saying accelerate this. I don't see a majority of folks saying put a lot of time into this, but I get the sense that people would like some more information about other models, alternatives, a little sense of what's going on, but I, at the same time, don't see a strong push to then take that and start having discussions about changing it, but I think there's some interest in at least knowing what's going on.
okay, thanks.
Is that,
with the
is that fair?
Yeah, there's kind of 3 people who would be interested in at least considering. So if through the results of your research, you felt that it made sense to modify it.
And Dan's lobbying efforts.
And maybe you'd keep the 3 who are currently interested, and in fact find one more vote, and then we would, so we're not far away.
Yeah, we might increase it to 25.
Yeah, 50%.
So don't put a lot of time into it.
I think she knew the time just by...
I wanted to know if it actually was 11 yet.
Close enough.
Okay, so the 2 questions were same-day registration and percentage of signatures required for whatever that thing was on Section 610 binding referendum.
An advisory, not binding, advisory.
Okay. Well, I wrote down Section 610, so I can find it later.
Yeah, advisory referendum.
Yes. Any other questions?
And maybe, yeah, and I'm recalling questions in the past about referenda and what you can do in Maryland with them, and so I would say that maybe if you spend any time, it might be good to just get the overall big picture of what's allowed in terms of referenda, because we've had that question come up with when there was the proposal for gun restrictions, and I don't pretend to remember all the details, but I think there were prohibitions on the types of referenda you can have in Maryland, and kind of getting into some of the details about the percentages may even be getting a cart before the horse in terms of the types of things that we can do. So just a little bit of this, a little bit of background information on referenda might be a first step.
Yeah, one of our members has been the person who delves most into pieces of the Maryland Code and so on, so I'm hoping he'll take this on too. I've been more delving into the policy stuff, so.
Okay, thank you. Do we have everything we need for Board of Elections and the clerk? Yes? Good, thank you. We're adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Very good. Is it really that? I put a motion that we try to make it easier for people to get